Test, 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 test.
What episode of time? What are they, like 45 minutes, hour?
Half an hour.
At the end of the meeting.
Of course.
Take your time. Okay, great. So good evening, everybody. All right, so may I have a motion to begin facilitation of the public session meeting? Awesome, great, thank you. All right. I would like to announce, due to the ongoing pandemic, the Montgomery Township Board of Education expects that in-person attendees will adhere to the following: are not exhibiting any COVID-compatible symptoms, wear face coverings pursuant to New Jersey Executive Order 251, indoor standards, sit in a socially distant manner from members of different households, and maintain social distancing when waiting in line to make public comment. We are very appreciative of your cooperation with these indoor safety protocols. Ms. Shower, roll call, please.
Ms. Bursch? Ms. Bursch?
Present.
Mr. Carlson? Ms. Franco Herman? Present. Ms. Harris? Here. Mr. Speck?
Here.
Ms. Spina? Present. Mr. Chouari?
Present.
Mr. Todd?
Present.
Ms. Spence Wallace?
Present.
Excellent.
Everyone, please rise for the flag salute.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. We'd like to welcome all of the community to our Tuesday, January 25th public meeting session once again. So at this time, we're going to delve into our agenda for tonight, and I'm going to move an item around. I'm sure Joyce will be appreciative of that. So if you're ready, Miss Joyce Wang is going to share with us our student representative report. And she's one of two of our student board representatives. Ms. Wang, thank you.
Thank you so much. So today I have a lot of exciting things to announce. The first thing is semester 2 at Montgomery High School is officially beginning. We've concluded a very successful in-person semester. With that comes the switching of the lunches. So we have a segmented unit lunch. So for those who were the first lunch will now be the second, and vice versa. Senior superlatives have come out. That's an exciting time. Seniors are excited to credit their fellow classmates for their outstanding qualities. Furthermore, sports are thriving. We're very excited to see our basketball team, fencing team, swimming, and track teams having already won several games, matches, or meets. Additionally, another sign that in-person school is getting back into the groove is there are many fundraisers that are happening. Class of 2025 is hosting a movie night this Friday, to which students from all grades are invited to. It's $15 a ticket. So Additionally, a lot of clubs are doing Valentine's Day fundraisers. One club is doing a candy grams operation, and another one similar to that. So Hallmark of in-person school, which is fundraising for our classes, is back and better than ever. So with these fundraising opportunities comes a great opportunity for inter-grade bonding, which is incredible. And we are looking forward to a new semester of success. Our Disney trip is coming up for seniors. There are many opportunities awaiting ahead of us, and we're very excited to go and grab. Furthermore, continuing on from updates I've given you all before, I'm getting ready to release the mental health survey I've worked on with Ms. Pino and the counseling services at my school. With the end of the first semester and the end of the midterms, there have been many removed confounding variables that could have potentially swayed my results before, such as the college application season, the cold weather, the many assignments before the first semester ending, post-winter break slumps, etc. So with that, I hope to gauge more successful results with questions such as asking students to rank the smoothness of their transition from virtual school to in-person school, asking if they've recuperated losses of motivation, asking them what areas of their school life have been negatively impacted by virtual schooling and which aspects of their life have been positively impacted by in-person schooling, with aspects such as work completion, study habits and organization, time management, etc. And with that, I want to release that very soon to our student body and to continue working with our now principal, Ms. Pino, and with counseling services at my school. So thank you, and that's all I have for tonight.
Wonderful, thank you, Ms. Wang. So we're really looking forward to hearing the details of your well-constructed student survey. So tonight we have the pleasure of our board and district attorney, Stephen Fogarty. He will be conducting a presentation on harassment, intimidation, and bullying, as well as ethics. And also Tom Wayne and Stacy Young. But sitting in for Mary this evening, we will first hear from Mr. Damian Papa. He is our assistant superintendent of schools, and he is here this evening due to our superintendent, Mary McLaughlin's absent. So please join me on behalf of your Board of Education in sending out thoughts and prayers and blessings to Mary, her husband, and her entire family. They've experienced two really significant losses, and that is the reason that she is absent this evening. So thank you for your support in that effort. So Mr. Papa?
Thank you for that introduction, Madam President.
You're welcome.
I am Damian Papa, Assistant Superintendent of Schools. I am very happy to be here tonight in Ms. McLaughlin's absence. Prior to introducing our first presenter of the evening, I would like to take a few minutes to share with everyone some of the events that took place last week in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, as well as share a few spotlights from this month as selected by our school principals, Ms. Scotty, Ms. Lacey, Mr. Richards, Mr. Delgado, and Ms. Pino Beatty. Orchard students had a week of service to honor Dr. King that included learning about the importance of why Dr. Martin Luther King Day is a day of service. Students created artwork that was added to the Orchard Changemakers bulletin board. They also showed appreciation for their elders through the creation of artwork and the writing of notes for the residents of the Foothill Acres Rehabilitation and Nursing Center in Hillsborough. Our Orchard students demonstrated their compassion for animals through their support of a local animal shelter, and concluded the week by showing their empathy for their peers, their involvement in UNICEF USA, which works for the survival, protection, and development of children worldwide through fundraising, advocacy, and education. Yesterday, Orchard kicked off Great Kindness Challenge, a week that includes donations to the Montgomery Food Bank and days dedicated to wearing clothing with positive messages, expressing thanks to as many individuals as possible, making every effort to be helpful with classmates, teachers, and family, writing a thank you note to an adult at Orchard, and displaying commitment to teamwork by learning Monty here. Village Elementary School celebrated the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service holiday by encouraging students to engage in an act of service during the holiday weekend and then sharing their experiences with their classmates and teachers. The VES Morning News provided students and staff with video experiences that included MLK Day on Yes I Can Kids, in which students took villagers on a journey while doing their very own service project and encouraged students to commit to one of their own, as well as a Just Garden, What is Social Justice? Village has displays in the main foyer, media center, and classrooms that pay tribute to Dr. King. In addition, there were inclusive curriculum lessons that incorporated video, as well as read-aloud resources, including My Friend Martin, for every classroom. I will not reach the level of excitement that Miss Lacey did when she spoke with me, so please understand. Our first fourth grade choral concert since the pandemic will be taking place tomorrow night at 7 o'clock in the MPAC. All last week, LMS utilized its morning meeting platform as well as its after-school program, Empowering Young Monty, to celebrate the global impact of Dr. King. The students focused on how they could be agents of change like Dr. King with the following reflective question. What do we want to use our voices to change, and how might we do that? In addition, students created morning meeting videos that were presented to the LMS student body. The videos provided information on Dr. King's numerous accomplishments, as well as the meaningful impact that some of his quotes had on the students who created those videos. After viewing, all classrooms engaged in a discussion of Dr. King's lasting positive impact. LMS students participated in the Scripps National Spelling Bee. Arkith Sharuku Mili is this year's LMS Scripps Spelling Bee winner. Students and staff at UMS were provided a school-wide address that was prepared by the Student Council and delivered by the Student Council President about Dr. King and promoting the Day of Service as a tribute. Similarly, UMS students completed in the preliminary and school final rounds of the Scripps National Spelling Bee. Atharv Navkar is this year's UMS school champion. He will represent UMS at the regionals next month. And lastly, from UMS, the orchestra students were able to showcase their talents at last week's orchestra concert right here at UMS. And I think we would all agree that's wonderful that we're able to see our students perform in person. And onto the high school. The work of Dr. King and the value of service is embedded in various MHS curriculum and explicitly noted throughout the month of January. The MHS Black Student Union has been working with advisors Ms. Marshall and Mr. Smith, as well as Social Studies Supervisor Ms. Douglas, to create robust interactive offerings and experiences for all students to engage in preparation of Black History Month. The first robotics kickoff of build season was hosted by Montgomery High School Team 1403. Team 1403, headed by Mr. Light, hosted over 30 area teams. The Montgomery High School Satellite Club was selected as one of the 57 winning teams in the NASA Tech Rise Student Challenge. Our students won the opportunity to launch their experiment on a NASA-sponsored flight. And lastly, the MHS boys basketball team raised over $6,000 for cancer research through the Coaches for Cancer basketball tournament.
Wow.
We hope in the future we are hearing more and more things like this, and I think the biggest challenge is just identifying a field. That is the biggest challenge that I think the principals face. At this time, I would like to introduce the Board of Education's attorney, Mr. Stephen Fogarty, who is here this evening to present 2 trainings for our board.
Good evening. I have the privilege tonight of presenting the board with their ethics training, which is required on an annual basis for members of the Board of Education. And I've also been asked this evening to speak to the board about harassment, intimidation, and bullying, particularly since ultimately the board is the final decision maker with regard to any complaint that is filed under the board's harassment, intimidation, and bullying policy, which derives from the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights. I want to apologize in advance for my back. So I'm going to begin with the ethics training for the board. Pretty ambitious, not unusual for the Montgomery board to have me deal with two issues that are both fairly substantive in terms of the presentation. But I want to go through the ethics training first. So with regard to the role of the board, it's often said that the board only has those express powers that are given to the board by the legislature. So what that means very simply is that there are no implied powers. When we read the statutes and the regulations that govern our existence and what we can and cannot do, we must derive our authority from those statutes and regulations. We cannot interpret them as giving us implied powers. So we have the ability to enforce the rules of the State Board of Education, to make, amend, and repeal rules for government and management of the Montgomery School District and our employees, and to perform all other things that are consistent with the lawful and proper conduct, equipment, and maintenance of the school district to ensure that the children of Montgomery receive a thorough and efficient education. And so this requires the board to do a number of things. Most critical, of course, is approving curriculum that meets our New Jersey student learning standards. We adopt a budget on an annual basis because if we don't have the wheels on the bus, of course, doesn't propel itself. So we need to make sure that we have adequate finances in order to ensure that every child receives a thorough and efficient education. We hire the necessary certified personnel to educate the district students, and we spend a good deal of time developing policies for the management of our school district. Significantly, none of these actions that the board takes does it take alone. It acts based on the recommendation of the superintendent of schools. So the superintendent's recommendations with regard to all of the items on the agenda for this evening, which touch upon many of these areas, that recommendation is critical. The board cannot act without getting that recommendation from the superintendent. There are also a number of things that the board must do as the final decision maker. And these become critical because these are the decisions ultimately that affect the lives of parents and students and residents of our communities. As I said, and I'm going to talk about this at some length this evening, harassment, intimidation, and bullying appeals by students or staff members, keeping in mind that this law protects our students against other students and our employees. All of those cases wind their way up to the board as a final decision. Long-term suspensions. No student in Montgomery can be suspended for more than 10 days without the board ultimately making that decision. Residency appeals. If there is a belief that someone is attending our schools illegally, that they are not residents of our communities, then only the board can make a decision to disenroll those students because they are not residents of Montgomery Township. We have any number of associations and unions in the district. They file grievances under their collective negotiations agreements. They're not happy with some decision, some policy, something that affects the terms and conditions of their employment. Those grievances wind their way up through the early appeal process and ultimately to the board. And the board is the final decision maker with regard to any grievance that is filed under any collective negotiations agreement. Terminations for cause. So every employee in this school district has a contract. And if that contract is going to be terminated midterm for cause, only the board can do that. Superintendent cannot do that without the board taking final action. Increment withholdings. If it's determined by the superintendent that an employee is not deserving of a salary increase from one year to the next, that's an increment. Withholding their salary requires that the board act by a majority vote of the full board. Non-renewals, these are for our non-tenured staff and for our support staff. On May 15th, they are told whether or not they have a contract for the following school year. Superintendent makes that decision on May 15th, and it's a final decision. However, the employee can appeal that decision to the board. That is the one and only time that the board can trump the superintendent's decision. The board can hire an employee that the superintendent has notified that they are being non-renewed if the board determines that that decision was an incorrect decision. The only personnel recommendation that the board can reject and substitute its judgment for that of the superintendent. It's important to say that the board functions only when it's in session and not a quorum. And a quorum of the board is required to convene a meeting and to take action, which is what we're doing here tonight. That's pretty simple and straightforward. We know that when we come together every month for public board meetings, that we do that as a quorum of the board, which means that there must be at least 5 of us here in order to take action. But why do I bring this to your attention tonight? I bring it to your attention tonight because this is governed by the Open Public Meetings Act. And what we need to be very careful of, because it's a trap for the unwary, is where we engage in conversations with each other of and about matters that can come before the board for the board to take action. We can do that through emails or text messages or social media, and where we invite responses from 5 board members to those particular issues, we run the risk of constituting a quorum, which would be a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. Those violations are not within the jurisdiction of the Commissioner of Education. Rather, a complaint that there's been a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act would go to the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office. So we want to be mindful of that. We want to make sure that with emails and text messages that we do not hit reply all. We want to make sure that we do not invite responses to those subjects that we may be addressing. We can communicate with each other. We cannot communicate in real time or simultaneously if it creates a quorum. Also keep in mind that our emails, our text messages, our postings on social media may very well constitute government records. Under the Open Public Records Act, any communication that we as board members communicate is a government record. If you are communicating anything of and about the Montgomery School District, it is a government record. Whether or not the public has access to it depends upon its content. And so if it is content of and about school business, it may in fact be accessible. If it is private and personal, it is not accessible. But you obviously do not want your text messages being viewed for a determination as to whether they are government records. You don't want your personal emails viewed as to whether or not they are government records. And so the takeaway here is you make sure that all communications go over the district server. We don't use our personal emails. We do not send text messages. Particularly mindful of that is we shouldn't be doing that during a public board meeting. Because if we do it during a public board meeting, then it's fair game. If somebody in the public sees us doing that, they make a request under the Open Public Records Act, affectionately referred to as OPRA, then those text messages become subject to at least my review, and they may be subject to the public's review as well. The board and the administration. The board's direct responsibilities are to make policy, develop plans, evaluate outcomes, not manage the day-to-day operations of the schools. It's often said that it is the board's responsibility to make sure that our schools in Montgomery are well run, not to run them. So members are responsible, and this is the code of ethics. Members are responsible not to administer the schools. No board member by virtue of her office shall exercise any administrative responsibility with respect to the schools, or as an individual command the services of any employee in the school district. What does that mean? That means very simply that a board member cannot command the services of one of our principals, cannot command the services of the superintendent or the business administrator, cannot command the services of a supervisor or a director. All of that must go through the superintendent, and all of that must, if it's going to happen, all of that has to be a collective decision by the Board of Education. An individual board member does not have the authority to do that. In terms of access to our district schools, it's often said, and you can see it reflected in your own policies, that our board members do not have all access to the district schools, and in many respects have no greater authority than any other parent or community member. We are expected to observe the visitor's policy. Obviously, if you are there as a parent, a family member, to advocate for your children, then you would respect the visitor's policy. But it's important to note that as a board member, you don't have the ability to go into one of our schools, even if it's for a laudatory purpose. You know, you don't have the ability to go in to inspect it. You wouldn't have the ability to go in and see how it's, to observe classrooms or to determine whether the schools are being properly maintained. The only way that that can happen is with a decision being made by the full board and with the cooperation of the superintendent. You delegate these responsibilities to two people principally, the superintendent and the business administrator. You hold them accountable to make sure that they are carrying out the goals of the board, the district goals, and to make sure that the schools are well run. The relationship between the board and the administration is intended to be cooperative, and so you should share your concerns with the administration in advance of our meetings. If there are questions about the agenda, if there are questions about anything that's being recommended, then the best practice is to have those questions answered before we get here. That assures an effective public response. We should be mindful of matters which are appropriate for public discussion, and those that are reserved for private consultation or executive discussion. I'll get into that in just a moment as well. Code of Ethics, as reflected in our board policy, keep in mind the Code of Ethics is absolute in terms of our responsibilities. Our board policies, in some instances, go beyond the Code of Ethics and require more of us than the legislature requires of us. Our policy says that a board member confronted with a community complaint should withhold comment and instead refer the issue to the superintendent. We as a board can only act at a public meeting after a failure of an administrative solution. So only after that complaint is referred to the superintendent. If it is not adequately resolved, can we take it up as a board? Those complaints come to you in all places. They come to you on the soccer field. They come to you in the grocery store. Somebody calls you up privately. They send you emails. And, you know, it's our nature to want to respond. We are helpers at heart. We want to be responsive. We want to try and address those complaints. Just keep in mind that the Code of Ethics and our board policy requires that that complaint be referred to the superintendent. So the Code of Ethics also says that we will support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. In simple terms, if we want to discuss an employee in the school district, they need to be rice noticed. Rice notice is simply putting them on notice that there's going to be a closed session discussion, give them the ability to waive their privacy rights. More importantly, we should not be discussing our employees during a public board meeting, whether it's the superintendent or members of the administration or any members of the certified or support staff. And a violation of this command occurs when there's evidence that a board member took deliberate action which resulted in undermining, opposing, compromising, or harming school personnel in the performance of their duty. If we're not satisfied with a recommendation of the superintendent, then that's an issue that should be discussed in executive session after proper notice to the superintendent. We should not be publicly criticizing or making public comments that would undermine the effectiveness of our superintendent or our staff. So, in terms of the division of responsibility between the board and the superintendent, the board establishes the policies, the superintendent implements those policies. Superintendent is the primary professional advisor to the board. Policies should not be adopted or revised without consultation with the superintendent. Superintendent is responsible for the development, supervision, operation of the school program and facilities, has to be given some latitude with regard to administering those policies and to developing regulations that are consistent with the commands of your policies. Board members. The board's a unit. We're not a collection of individuals. Members are expected to share opinions, but the board elects a single course of action by a majority vote, and once that happens, regardless of whether we are dissenting voices or we've expressed a dissenting opinion, we're expected to support the majority decision of the board. In open meetings, to preserve decorum and to ensure the board expresses a single consistent position, it is our president alone who speaks on the board's behalf. And what that means is that members of the public speak to the board president. They cannot call out individual board members and expect to get responses. So unless the board president decides that another board member should respond to a member of the public, she alone speaks on our behalf. And we all come to this process with talents and expertise And we may be physicians and educators and lawyers and accountants, but we have professionals that we hire, and we have to respect their opinions. Our deliberations should be with regard to their recommendations, not substituting our professional expertise or personal experiences for those recommendations. And the powers of the board and the authority of a board member are not coextensive, and our board policy makes this very clear. No board member, by virtue of her office, shall exercise any administrative responsibility with respect to the schools or as an individual command the services of any district employee. Board members on their own have no supervisory authority with regard to any employees in our district. So confidentiality. We learn about things in executive session that are confidential. They are confidential with regard to students in Montgomery. They are confidential and often highly sensitive issues involving our employees. What we learn in executive session, the confidentiality of that information is sacrosanct, and we cannot disclose it to any third party. Our board policy explains that confidential information shall be used only for the purpose of helping board members discharge their official responsibility. And so imagine that in executive session we learn from our superintendent that an employee was suspended and must undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Imagine the harm that would be caused to that individual if it was disclosed to a third party. Even something as simple as contemplating whether or not we are going to redistrict, and having a friend that's going to move into Montgomery Township wants to know which school they should move into, which school area they should move into. Suffice it to say that confidential information is exactly that, confidential information. And we also run the risk, if we disclose confidential information about students whose rights are protected by federal and state law, employees whose rights are protected by state law, we run the risk that there is the potential for civil liability because those individuals have a right that they can vindicate under the law if there is a violation of their privacy rights. So one of the main limits on the role of board members is the code of ethics. The School Ethics Commission is responsible for the conduct of board members. The School Ethics Commission does two things. They consider complaints that may be filed against us, and they adjudicate those complaints. The other thing that they do is that they issue advisory opinions. So if there's something you're concerned about, something you want to do, some outside activity, whether you can vote on a particular matter, whether you have a financial interest that precludes you, you can ask for an advisory opinion from the School of Ethics, from the School Ethics Commission, and they're pretty good about this. You get it into them by the 10th of the month. They'll usually get you an advisory opinion by the following month. Keep in mind that if the School Ethics Commission finds that you have violated the Code of Ethics, they can reprimand you, censure you, suspend you, or remove you for violating the Code of Ethics if they found that your conduct was so serious as to warrant that kind of an extreme measure. An ethics complaint can be filed by anyone. It can be filed by anyone save this Board of Education. We cannot, as a Board of Education, decide, no matter how outrageous we may think the conduct of one of our own board members is, we as a Board of Education cannot file a complaint against one of our own members. You must step back and you must file that complaint as a private individual. But other than that, anyone can file an ethics complaint, any member of the community, any resident, any staff member. And this is the Code of Ethics. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I've gone through most of this with you, but this is verbatim the Code of Ethics. I have a responsibility to lay this out for you so that when we sign off on our certifications tonight, I have reviewed all of these with you. And so, when would we get into trouble? So with regard to the Code of Ethics, we would get into trouble. Actually, I'm going to go back a minute, I'm sorry. The limited role of board members is seen in a number of sections on the Code of Ethics. So before I get into the troublemaking part of this, you'll confine your board action to policy making, carry out your responsibility not to administer the schools, support and protect school personnel. You can see that there's a statutory citation there for every one of those obligations or responsibilities. So now we get to the trouble part. When do we get in trouble? We give a direct order to school personnel. or become directly involved in activities or functions that are the responsibility of school personnel. When we get involved in the day-to-day operation of the school district, we walk into this building tonight and we go into a restroom, and it's a mess, and we're not happy with it. And we walk outside, and the buildings and ground supervisor is there, and we direct him to go in and clean that bathroom. Or there's a custodial or maintenance employee within eyeshot, and we direct that person to go in and clean that restroom. That would be a violation of the Code of Ethics. We do not have any authority to direct or to command the performance of any employee, despite the fact that it may be for a very legitimate purpose. We are taking deliberate action which results in undermining, opposing, or compromising school personnel would also be a violation. Attempting to resolve a complaint, yes?
Steve, quick question. Is there any exception if a situation is hazardous or a danger to the public?
Always an exception, in my opinion, Mr. Todd, if we're faced with an emergent situation. If that restroom I talked to you about is flooded, then obviously I would be of a different opinion. If there was some emergent circumstance that required that you say to somebody you need to get in there and take care of that, it's a health and safety issue, that would be the exception. So acting or attempting to resolve a complaint, conducting an investigation or an inquiry to that complaint, and I'm going to go over a couple of cases with you in just a few moments where board members got themselves into serious trouble where they decided to investigate complaints on their own without referring it to the superintendent. So these limitations are seen probably most clearly when we talk about personnel decisions. The board member's role in hiring is to vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendation of the superintendent. Doesn't mean by any stretch that you have to accept every personnel recommendation that's made by the superintendent. You have the ability to say, we need you to go back to the well and to bring us another candidate. However, you cannot leapfrog over the superintendent and recommend somebody that has not been recommended by the superintendent. You also can't withhold your approval for the hiring of a candidate for arbitrary or capricious reasons. What would be arbitrary and capricious? Teachers being recommended for a contract that would give that teacher tenure. You're philosophically opposed to tenure. That would not be a basis upon which you could withhold your affirmative vote. And you should generally, as a best practice, limit involvement in hiring the superintendent, and then only considering the superintendent's recommendations for all other positions to avoid interference with the superintendent's power to recommend candidates to the board. Now, I want to emphasize that this is a best practice recommended by the School Ethics Commission. It is not a legal requirement. It is not contained in the Code of Ethics. There is nothing in the law that actually restricts or dictates your level of involvement in hiring decisions. This is simply the best practice that is recommended by the School Ethics Commission. You decide what your involvement will be in that hiring process, and generally speaking, what the School Ethics Commission also says is that if board members are going to be involved in the interview process, it should be no more than 2 board members. It should be with the authorization and the agreement of the superintendent. And during that process, board members should not become interactively involved in the interview process. You should be there as observers, not to ask questions, not to present questions, but rather there to observe the interview process. So you see here an advisory opinion. Board member requested an opinion regarding authority to conduct exit interviews of staff members to determine the cause of the staff turnover. Here's a school district where there's a mass exodus out of the school district. Board member is legitimately concerned about it, concerned about recruitment, the lack of retention. What do we do to improve it? Wants to know if she can sit in on the exit interviews. The School Ethics Commission says absolutely not. That would be a responsibility of the administration. In that situation, board members would be involved in the day-to-day operation of the school. The advice, and again, advisory opinion, it's not a complaint adjudication, it's advice, recommendation. Whether or not this will ultimately turn out to be a violation would determine on whether a complaint was filed, but this is the advice of the School Ethics Commission. Board member requested an opinion regarding the appropriate level of involvement for board members in the interview process. Advisory opinion, this reflects what I've just said to you. No more than 2 board members may sit on the interview committee when established by the superintendent. Must be strictly limited to functioning in an advisory role to the superintendent. The board members should not conduct the interview. It should not be interactive. They have the ability after the interview to tell the superintendent how they felt about the interview, how they felt the candidates may have performed, but that should take place after the interview is conducted. This is a case in which a board member was not happy with the recommendation being made by the superintendent, was not happy with the candidate that was being brought forward, and wanted to know about the candidates who were not brought forward. Wanted to see those resumes. The superintendent refused, believing that disclosing the resumes of those individuals could potentially have an adverse impact on them in their local school districts. Board member would not take no for an answer, went to the board office on her own, went to the superintendent's office, superintendent was not there, got someone to give her a key to the file cabinet, opened it up, got the resumes, reviewed the resumes, and I don't need to tell you, this went south pretty quickly. So, clearly a violation of the School Ethics Act. So in this case, the complaint alleged that the board president violated the code by personally issuing a rights notice to the business administrator. Apparently the business administrator became so frazzled by it, she resigned her position. There was a complaint filed as to whether or not the board president had the authority to act unilaterally without the support of the board and the superintendent, and the answer was she did not. The board president has the authority to rights notice one and only one person, that is the superintendent. All other employees must be rights noticed by the superintendent herself. 2 board members allege that the Director of Special Services was double dipping, working in 2 school districts. They felt that her conduct was fraudulent and that basically she was ripping off the school district. So those 2 board members decided that they were going to conduct their own reconnaissance mission, decided they were going to camp out at the other school district and see whether or not that Director of Special Services was really going to show up there. This too went south pretty quickly. They also happened to be wrong. So they were found to be in violation of the School Ethics Act, and they were publicly sanctioned for their conduct. Volunteering. So there's some bright lines here. As board members, your family members, your parents, and so when it comes to volunteering in the Montgomery School District, you may volunteer in any capacity provided that you do not supervise children and that you do not direct staff. So as long as you are there assisting, supporting, contributing, but you are not directing staff. So for example, you could be involved in a theatrical production, but you couldn't select the students who were going to get the roles in that theatrical production. You could be involved in set designing. You could be involved in costumes. You could be involved in assisting them in learning their lines for that theatrical production, but you could not direct staff or supervise students. Outside activities. When we talk about you being involved in outside activities that are not under the auspices of the Montgomery School District, so a booster club, the Educational Foundation, PTOs, PTAs, no restrictions. You can be an officer, you can be a trustee. There are no restrictions on your involvement in any of those activities, provided that if something comes before the board from that organization, you must abstain. So this was a board member that wanted to be the club advisor. Answer, no. And so now I want to talk to you a little bit about what you are required to do with regard to anything that you author or you communicate. Board member wrote an op-ed endorsing 4 candidates for the upcoming board election and openly advocating for the complainant's non-election, using a disclaimer that stated the author is writing this endorsement on his own personal behalf. His opinions are his own. The board member also admitted that he did not seek approval from the board before writing the op-ed. So as board members, you have a First Amendment right to express yourself, to express your opinion on matters of public importance, on matters involving our school district. But you have an obligation to self-identify. And that self-identification is unequivocal, which means that you can't do part of it and not all of it. So you have to say that my name is Stephen Fogarty. I'm a member of the Montgomery Township Board of Education. What I'm about to say has not been authorized by the Board of Education, and I'm making this statement as a private individual. All of that must be stated before you make that statement. And that would apply to social media, that would apply to written communications, that would apply to an op-ed piece, that would apply to a letter to the editor, any of those communications. And failing to disclaim those personal statements would violate the Code of Ethics. So here's a board member out of Piscataway. Board member signed his name on a political flyer that included his picture and name followed by the words Board of Education. The flyer stated that the persons on the flyer support South Asian persons and culture, and that the complainant, as a leader of a radical group, was challenging the controlling political party and trying to take over our township government. You can see that the statement is offensive, but keep in mind that the School Ethics Commission, they're not the civility police. They are not going to find a violation of the School Ethics Act, no matter how uncivil your comments may be of and about anybody. But they will find a violation of the Code of Ethics if you have not properly identified yourself with regard to this statement. And so there was a recommended penalty of censure for the board members' multiple violations. So I'm going to cover this in a little bit, so I'm not going to go over this right now. I thought this was interesting, and I wanted to bring it to your attention because it deals with an issue that has been front and center since the pandemic. Initially, we were remote. During the height of the pandemic, our board meetings were conducted remotely, and then we returned to in-person instruction once the public health emergency was discontinued. This issue arose in the context of whether board members have the right to participate at a meeting telephonically. And the school ethics, and this was a case in which the board member wanted to participate telephonically, and the board denied that request. And the board member who was refused the opportunity to participate telephonically filed a complaint before the School Ethics Commission, and the School Ethics Commission said that is a matter of local policy. It is not an issue that we are going to become involved with. It is not a violation of the School Ethics Act. No board member has the right to participate remotely in a board meeting. It is a privilege, and it should be incorporated in the board's policy. Free speech and the School Ethics Act. So I kind of alluded to this before. You have the ability to comment on matters of public importance, matters involving the Montgomery School District, but you can see here, and that's the bold statement at the bottom, that should be reflected in anything that you say individually that has not been authorized by the board. There are many things that the board will authorize the president to do and say. The president speaks on behalf of our board, and there will be certain discussions that the board will have, and will ask the president to speak for the board. But if you are going to speak on your own without authorization from the board, you want to be sure to use that legend. And again, I'm not going to be redundant here. Another advisory opinion, and the School Ethics Commission said, avoid holding yourself out as a board member. And there again, you'll see in bold what you need to state before you express your opinion about matters concerning the Montgomery Township School District, and even matters of public concern on social media. So in this case, the board president filed a complaint after another board member posted certain statements on Facebook and in a local newspaper. School board president doesn't let students speak. This is the first posting on Facebook. The board votes for programs that are not effective. 6 months is not long enough to write a plan. Second posting said, now if we could only do something about our local terrorists that destroy dreams and burn futures. And under this statement was a link to a photograph of the superintendent of schools.
Oh my goodness.
That too went south very quickly. undermining the authority of the superintendent, violation of the code of ethics, posting on Facebook without a self-identification, vilifying and not supporting school personnel in the performance of their duties. This was the Triple Crown. Social media guidelines for us. If I had my way, I would tell you not to post on social media. It is a trap for the unwary, in my opinion. However, I'm a realist. So, don't post anything that would violate any of the district policies. Uphold the district's value of respect for any individual and avoid making defamatory statements about the board, the school district employees, students, or their families. Don't disclose any confidential information. Do not use or refer to the Board of Education, your Board of Education title or position when soliciting anything, no matter how laudatory that might be. So maybe you are well connected with the corporate community in this town and you want to raise money for the Educational Foundation. As laudatory as that purpose might be, you don't have the authority to do that as an individual board member. You need the authority of the full board to do it. Refrain from having communications through social networks with other board members regarding any Board of Education business to avoid any potential violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. Do not respond to postings regarding the Board of Education or school district business or respond to any questions. And why? Because your responsive postings could very well be interpreted as you commenting or trying to resolve a problem for somebody before it is referred to the superintendent. Any questions about the Code of Ethics before I move on? And I know it's a lot to hear about, but hopefully it's clear. It allows you the flexibility in the joints that you need, but keeps you in your lane and protects you from any allegation of a violation of the Code of Ethics. So,
Madam President, I don't know if you can see me. I do have a question.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Any board member may submit a question to Mr. Fogarty at this time. Go ahead, Phyllis.
All right, so board policy trumps state law, is that right? Because I know the state law says that board members can go into school at any time, but the same, our board policy says we must go as visitors. Is that correct? I know also the state law says that every board member has a right to see applications. Is that correct or not? Also, I'm wondering, can board members volunteer? Like we have a busser shortage. You know, if people are missing, can we volunteer to be a bus driver, lunch monitor, recess monitor, and at times, unfortunately, at times relatives hear things that other people may not hear. Are they able to discuss that on social media? Those are my questions.
So I'm going to try to take those in the order in which you presented that to me.
Okay, sorry.
So with regard to the visitors policy, the board policy and the Code of Ethics are the same. When we go into the schools, we are expected to observe the visitors policies. When we go into the schools as parents or family members, we have to observe the visitors policies, and as individual board members, unless we have been delegated, unless our visit to the schools has been authorized by the full board, we would not have the ability as board members to go into the schools for the purposes of conducting board business. So that is the distinction. Visitors policy controls us if we are going into the schools as a member of the public. If we are going into the schools in order to conduct an investigation that we believe may be appropriate as a board member, then that would not be appropriate unless that visitation had been authorized by the full board. Second question was applications. The answer is that you have the ability to review applications for positions. You actually have the ability to review personnel files with the caveat that there must be some action pending before the board. So if someone is being recommended for a position, you have the ability to go in and review the application or the resume of the individual that you will be voting on. If someone is being recommended for disciplinary action or for non-renewal of employment, for termination. You have the ability during regular business hours to go in and review that personnel file. You would not have the ability to review a personnel file even if there was a legitimate interest. Let's say a complaint had been made, or you were concerned about something that you had heard about one of our employees. You would not have the ability to go in and review that personnel file unless there was recommended action to the board. The next question you asked me is, can you volunteer to be bus drivers? And God knows I wish you could, because there's such a shortage of bus drivers, or to be recess monitors, and the answer is you may not. You may not be employed by the Board of Education while you are a sitting board member. That would be a violation. That would actually be a prohibited act, not even a code of ethics violation. It would be more serious. And even as a volunteer, a recess monitor, the reason that you cannot do that is because you would be supervising children. There's a potential for liability. You would be conducting the day-to-day operation of the schools. So it is not permitted. And the last question, Ms. Bursch, I'm not sure I have it correct. I think you said, can you discuss something that you have heard a complaint about? Maybe you could be more clear about that.
Actually, I'm just wondering if someone in my family discusses an issue on the web and says, you know, that they might have learned information from, like if my child discusses something they heard me discuss as a board member, can they discuss that on the web and Facebook?
So the answer is yes, if it's a matter of public information. So I want to be careful here that if it was something the board acted upon, that would be fine, but certainly not anything that was confidential or something that was discussed in executive session. Is that clear?
Thank you. The one thing I'm sorry I forgot to mention was, can you discuss the difficulty for board members to be able to, I guess, disagree? I mean, if you are not able to disagree in public with your superintendent, then a board member is not able to discuss an issue that they disagree during a board meeting, right? Because many times public gets upset that board members don't speak or say these things, but that's against our ethics. Is that true?
So I think there's flexibility here. I mean, I think if you disagree with the superintendent recommendation, or if you disagree with a position that has been taken, then I think the School Ethics Act and the Code of Ethics allows you to have a robust conversation and discussion with the superintendent at a public board meeting. What you would not be able to do would be to publicly vilify her for that recommendation. So I think it's really simply a difference in how we approach it.
Not the individual.
Is it also an issue that if the board makes a decision, that then is that a transition point where you are more supportive because if the board has made the decision, even if you may personally disagree?
Yes, I think if the board makes a decision, we have an obligation to support the board's decision once that decision is made. To the extent that we disagree with it, then that disagreement, that dissent, that discussion should take place here.
Mr. Fogarty, I have a question going back to an applicant interviewing. So you stated that as a board member, we do have the authority going through the superintendent to review the application.
Yes.
Of an applicant, and that would be for the individual the superintendent was recommending.
Yes.
Okay. Are board members permitted to review all the applications from all the individuals that applied for that particular position?
Yes.
Okay.
During regular business hours,
Mm-hmm.
in the personnel office or in the superintendent's office, the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just a quick question, thank you. Jumping back to being in the school, if, you know, for example, if I went into the school strictly as a parent, whether it was a class party, just to help in that matter, that's not a problem, right? Because I'm not going in as a board member, just as a
Exactly,
parent.
precisely correct. No restrictions whatsoever.
Thanks.
Any other questions? So now I'm going to move on to an even more challenging topic. Harassment, intimidation, and bullying. As I said at the outset, the board is the final arbiter of these cases, and this law is evolving and is going to change for the 2022-2023 school year. So the legislature enacted probably the most aggressive anti-bullying Bill of Rights in the country, and did that for very good reason, so that we treat harassment, intimidation, and bullying very different from code of conduct violations. Every act that constitutes harassment, intimidation, and bullying is a code of conduct violation, but not every code of conduct violation is an act of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And so the law is intended to treat those who target other children because of their distinguishing characteristics, whatever they may be, or because of their protected categories, such as race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, mental or physical or sensory disability, or any other distinguishing characteristic. We treat that differently. And we treat it differently for very good reasons, because that is far more pernicious than a lack of civility. A lack of civility is one thing. A lack of civility that targets somebody because of those protected categories is something very different. And the law also requires that a number of other things have to be present in order to make a finding of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So the first step in the process, or what is referred to very often as the first prong of the analysis, is that we look at the victim and we ask why that victim was subjected to that conduct. Then we ask, where did it take place? Because there's a difference in how we treat those things that happen at school and school functions and our school buses, and those things that happen outside of school. This law is a 24/7 law, which means that we have an obligation to investigate those things that happen outside of the Montgomery School District, that happen on weekends, that happen in the evenings, that happen at parties, and that happen on social media, which is the most difficult challenge for us. And it's the most difficult challenge for kids, because when it happens on social media, it is so much more damaging for them, because the harassment, intimidation, and bullying happens over and over and over again. And so we have an obligation to address that as well. And then there are some things that our anti-bullying specialists, who are our guidance counselors in the district, who investigate these cases, they have to not only investigate whether or not the motivation was based on a protected category or distinguishing characteristic, they also have to determine whether that conduct substantially disrupts or interferes with the rights of the student, the victim, or other students, or whether it interferes with the orderly operation of the school. And they do that by looking at this statutory definition and asking if a reasonable person should know under the circumstances that the act will have the effect of emotionally harming a student, has the effect of insulting or demeaning that child, or creates a hostile environment. So what's a hostile environment? I don't feel safe here. I don't feel like this is a comfortable space. I don't want to come into school. I don't want to go into that classroom. I don't want to go into that gymnasium. I don't want to go into the lunchroom because I feel unsafe there. I feel that I will be victimized again if I go back there. That's a hostile educational environment. And so we look at all of those things, and most importantly is we look at it from the perspective of the victim. It doesn't matter if the offender didn't mean it. It doesn't matter if the offender is contrite. It doesn't matter if the offender didn't know that I was in that protected category. If the offender thought I was Jewish and I'm not. If the offender thought I was a person of color and I'm not. If the person thought that my sexual orientation was an orientation that it was not. if the person thought that I had a mental disability or physical disability, and I did not. It doesn't matter. It's how the victim perceived the conduct. We always look to the victim. When do we look to those other things? When we talk about intervention and discipline, we look to whether or not it was a mistake, whether it was unintended, what the motivation was. Mr. Todd.
Yes, I have a question. So I know a lot of these incidents, the big issue is where it took place. So, for example, bullying incident takes place on a Saturday night at a sleepover. We know kids nowadays, everything they do, they put it on TikTok, whatever. The video of that incident starts getting shared on Monday at school. Can that incident still be investigated as a hit incident?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what we've come to find out, and how do we find it out? We find it out as the law evolves through case law and decisions by our state courts and our federal courts. So if the conduct occurs off campus and it involves social media, we are going to go through the very same analysis because it is off-campus conduct that is not going to obviate the need for us to investigate it. There's one difference. So if it happens off campus and we find that it meets all of this criteria, then we can provide intervention, support, and we can make an affirmative finding that it constitutes harassment, intimidation, and bullying. But if it happens off campus, we cannot discipline the offender in terms of out-of-school suspension or disciplinary action unless we determine that imposing that discipline is necessary to restore the health and safety of that school. So if it was something on social media that included harming other students, if it was a racial attack, if it was a bias attack, that clearly would be something that we could impose discipline. But if it was if it was something that happened on social media that did not rise to that level, it would still be harassment, intimidation, and bullying. We would make that affirmative finding, but we could not discipline the offender because the discipline is the same as off-campus conduct under the Code of Conduct. And what our courts have said is that we can make a finding it's harassment, intimidation, and bullying. We need to provide support to the victim, interventions in terms of counseling to the offender, but we cannot impose discipline unless the discipline is necessary to restore the health and safety to the school that those children attend. Claire?
Yes, thank you.
Can I ask a question about, I guess, the reasonableness and the perspective of victim? When we talk about the perspective of victim, is it the reasonableness of that kid? Like, if a kid is disabled, is the reasonableness then the reasonableness of a kid that's disabled versus, at times I think it's considered a reasonableness of an average kid versus a kid who is disabled being attacked or being disabled.
So it's the reasonableness standard applies to the victim. We have to put ourselves in the shoes of the victim and ask whether it was reasonable for me to have perceived that I was targeted because of because of a protected category or because of another distinguishing characteristic. But so not to complicate this, I'm going to call them characteristics, whatever they are. Regardless of whether they're covered by the law against discrimination or it is some other physical characteristic. We need to put ourselves, as part of that investigation, into the shoes of the victim and determine whether it was reasonable for me to perceive that I was targeted for that reason.
How is someone who's never experienced something like that able to do that? If I am a counselor who has never experienced or understood discrimination by race or by gender or by, I guess ability, different ability, how can someone actually do that?
Well, I think
Or
that.
do you understand what's reasonable for that person?
Well, I think that when we interview the victim, we get an understanding from the victim as to how he or she felt, why he or she felt that this had happened to him. We ask probing questions If we are dealing with a child who is disabled, we're going to be asking those questions. We're also going to be looking at the entirety of the circumstances and determining whether it was reasonable to conclude that the child was targeted because of that disability. And often, sometimes it's difficult in order for that to happen, particularly when we're talking about children of tender years. But we're going to focus on the victim. And I'm not certain necessarily that it requires of our anti-bullying specialists that they be able to identify necessarily with that characteristic. I think it's more critical that they be able to identify sensitively with how that child feels about what happened to him or her.
Mr. Fogarty, I have a question.
Sure.
What if during the course of an investigation, the parents of the students come to the school and say, we've had a discussion, privately and everything's fine? What does the school do, or what are we supposed to do? The investigation continues?
Yes, and that's a great question, and it's one that I get all the time. And my answer, my response to that question all the time is, we cannot unring that bell. So once we get a complaint, we have to investigate it. Because what we often encounter is parents who do not want their child to be subjected to an investigation. We often get parents who, families that feel that this is something that should be handled in the home. It's very often sometimes a cultural thing. And sometimes a situation where parents say, you know what, I want my son or daughter to suck it up and to move on and not make a big deal about this. We have an obligation under this law to investigate every single complaint that comes to us, even anonymous complaints. We're required to investigate under this law.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, in terms of the process, before the process actually, who does the law apply to? All board members, all employees, volunteers, contracted service providers. It applies to all of us. And we are required to verbally report the violation to the principal or the principal's designee on the same day. And there's no flexibility in the joints here. There's no wiggle room. It's got to be done on the same day. Yes?
Mr. Fogarty, I have a question about, you already answered. This law is applicable to all of us, whether it's student to student or adult to adult.
Adult to student or student to student. The law only protects kids.
Only students.
So
what about staff to staff complaints of HIB?
that would be covered under the affirmative action policy, sexual harassment policy, healthy workplace environment policy. Those are all covered under different policies. The harassment, intimidation, and bullying policy only protects our students. And when I say that all board members, as well as employees, volunteers, and contracted service providers, we are responsible for reporting acts of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And they must be reported on the same day to the principal. And then within 2 days, a written report has got to be forwarded by the person making the report, the reporter. And then those are complaints. The superintendent must then, the principal must then decide whether or not those cases are going to be investigated under the Code of Conduct or under the harassment, intimidation, and bullying policy. And that's going to change a little bit next year, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But we also have an obligation with regard to these acts under the Law Enforcement Memorandum of Agreement to notify the Montgomery Township Police Department if we believe that that act of harassment, intimidation, and bullying may rise to the level of a hate crime.
I have a question.
Yes.
So back to Patrick's example of something happens at a party on a Saturday night. Now, let's say I have one of my children shows me this, and they're telling me that something is awry, that this other student may have taken offense, or that they feel that they're being intimidated. And it's again Saturday night. Am I supposed to call the principal on Saturday night, or do we wait until Monday morning? How does that work?
Depending on what those circumstances are, you can wait until Monday morning. I want to distinguish that. Let's say that on Friday night you're at a football game and you see something that happens, a physical assault that's racially motivated, a physical assault that appears to have targeted somebody because of a characteristic, that would be something you'd have to act on immediately.
If you're at an event.
Yes. If you see it, if you hear it, if somebody tells you about it.
Okay.
I just
If
put an
it's
end to those.
hearsay.
I just put an end to those Saturday night parties, right?
Thank goodness I don't have kids that old yet. I will soon.
So that is the procedure in terms of seeing it, hearing it, have somebody tell you about it. This cannot be lateral to somebody else. We have an obligation to do it ourselves. So a paraprofessional can't go back and report it to the teacher and expect the teacher to report it. Custodian can't report it to a teacher and expect the teacher to report it. We all have an obligation to report it when we see it, when we hear about it, when somebody tells us about it. So we have something in the district called the principal's discretion. That didn't always exist in the law. It was one of the amendments to the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights. It's going to change a little bit next year. But what it means very simply is that when it goes to the principal decides whether it goes to the anti-bullying specialist for investigation under the board's harassment, intimidation, bullying policy, or is it a code of conduct. The important part of this is that the principal has to assume everything in that report is true. Can't second guess it, can't do his own investigation, can't supplement the report. So if the report comes in and the complaint is that someone has been targeted because of a characteristic, regardless of whether the principal knows that there's a background there or there's a history, the principal cannot substitute her judgment in any way. Must assume everything in that complaint is true, and if it meets the initial criteria, it goes to the anti-bullying specialist. If it does not, when wouldn't it? Parent calls up, says, my daughter was bullied on the bus today. Principal says, what happened? And the parent says that another student said, I don't like you, I've never liked you, I don't want to sit next to you. Anything more than that, probing questions, if all of those answers are in the negative, that is likely going to be investigated under the code of conduct, not under the harassment, intimidation, and bullying law. So the board does not become involved again until the conclusion of the investigation. Superintendent reports the results of the investigation to the board no later than the date of the next regularly scheduled board meeting following the completion of the investigation. The first report to the board is advice. It is not advice and consent. The consent does not happen until the second board meeting. So the first meeting is to present the results of the harassment, intimidation, and bullying investigation and to also report the superintendent's decision. Board members in executive session cannot waive. Parents cannot waive their children's privacy rights. This can only take place in a closed session. Board members have the opportunity at that point to ask questions under the statute. The board also has the ability to bring the anti-bullying specialist into executive session to explain her or his investigation. Superintendent is to report to you any consequences imposed under the code of conduct, any services provided, training established, any other recommendations by the superintendent. Again, the superintendent's decision. After the superintendent reports the results of the investigation to the board, then within 5 days, the superintendent has to report her decision to both the alleged victim and the alleged offender or offenders. That triggers the right of the parents of either the victim or the offender to request a hearing before the board. Hearing before the board can also be requested when the principal or designee makes a preliminary determination that a complaint is not within the scope of the harassment, intimidation, and bullying policy. So I go to the principal, I have a complaint, the principal reviews the complaint, says I'm not going to investigate this under the harassment, intimidation, and bullying policy. I don't agree. I have the ability to challenge that, and I have the ability to request a hearing before the board to challenge what I am going to argue is an abuse of discretion by the principal. hearing has to take, has to be filed within 60 days, and the board has to hold the hearing within 10 business days. I've already said it's an executive session, and I've told you who can be present. Ultimately, the board may choose to affirm, modify, or reverse the superintendent's decision. And at the next regularly scheduled board meeting, the board must make a final decision, and the law also requires that we issue a written decision to the alleged offender and the alleged victim, either affirming, rejecting, or modifying the superintendent's decision, and that decision can be appealed to the Commissioner of Education. And we have had any number of cases in the school district that have been appealed to the Commissioner of Education.
Mr. Fogarty, there's a timeline for that too, right?
90 days.
Parent step is 90 days.
90 days. So our involvement with this harassment, intimidation, and policy is that we have to review it on an annual basis. We're expected to conduct a reevaluation, a reassessment, make any necessary revisions and additions, and that's important. I think this is honored more by its breach than its observance by most school districts. And I'm not suggesting you're one of them, but I think that we do not review that policy on an annual basis. I think we should. I think most board policies are probably the policies that existed at the inception of the law and have not been changed. And if we adopt revisions to our policy, you have the right to do that under your governance and responsibilities. And if you change your policy, you need to forward it to the Executive County Superintendent within 30 days. A link to the board's policy must also appear prominently on our homepage, and it does. And we also have to examine the training needs of our district on an annual basis. Both our volunteers, our support staff, we need to make sure that everybody in the school district is trained on the board's harassment, intimidation, and bullying policy. Conduct away from school grounds. This was a case that wound its way up to the United States Supreme Court this past summer. All eyes were on it.
Yeah.
Rising sophomore did not make the varsity cheerleading team or the position she wanted on the softball team, following which she went to a local convenience store and she posted 2 photos on Snapchat. I've deleted the explicatives there, but you can see it was the caption that she posted after flipping the bird was F school, F softball, F cheerleading, F everything. Her language arts teacher, I'm sure, would be thrilled that she was able to use that word grammatically in every tense. In any event, when that was seen by the school officials, they disciplined her. They disciplined her for that off-campus conduct. And they took her off the cheerleading. They said she was not eligible for the cheerleading squad for a year. There was other disciplinary action. The board said that their disciplinary action was justified on the basis that this was a substantial disruption to the school district. And essentially, the issue before the United States Supreme Court was whether or not First Amendment rights of these kids basically trumped the school district's code of conduct policy, and the answer was that it did. And the United States Supreme Court said that off-campus conduct, when it is a lack of civility, when it is kids speaking in terms that may be profane and vulgar and off-putting and offensive, we do not have the ability to reach it unless it constitutes harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And so you see in the next case that was brought out of Sayreville, this was a student, 13 years old, posted a picture on Snapchat of a friend with a mud mask on her face with the caption, when he says he's only into black girls. After several students complained to the school, a HIB investigation was conducted. The board determined that the student had committed an act of harassment, intimidation, and bullying, disciplined the student. The parents challenged this, and they challenged this on the basis of the United States Supreme Court in Mahanoy, the last case I just identified, and the commissioner said, absolutely not. This was a case of racism, and so this was harassment, intimidation, and bullying. First Amendment does not trump a violation of the anti-bullying Bill of Rights. Teacher-student interactions, and again, this law protects students but it does not protect students from a teacher, in this case, at a Northern Valley Regional High School. This was a coach, and this was a coach who felt that team practices were far more important than any academic pursuits. Suffice it to say that he was a bit overbearing, a bit intolerant, but this kind of intolerance does not constitute harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So while the conduct of the coach was certainly questioned because he bullied, ostracized, and singled out this soccer player, the court found that he did not target this soccer player because of a distinguishing characteristic or a protected right. And what was argued here by this young man was that the protected category should be academic pursuits, that he was academically gifted, and the court refused to recognize that as a protected category. So even though there was an imbalance of power here, this was found not to constitute harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So, the amendments. As of July 9th, 2022, which is our next school year, preliminary determinations by the principal. The superintendent may disagree with those preliminary determinations and can send them back for an investigation. So that will be brand new in the law. The superintendent must notify the principal of her determination in writing. Superintendent will have to give an annual report to the board that includes the number of times that a principal made a preliminary determination that the incident did not meet the HIV threshold. So now, when principals exercise their discretion not to conduct an investigation, that is going to have to be reported to the superintendent, and the superintendent in turn is going to have to make an annual report to the board. Principal and the superintendent will have to consult law enforcement under the Uniform Memorandum of Agreement with regard to any conduct that is perceived as potentially a hate crime. Consequences for first and second offenses may be remedial action, including counseling or behavior intervention services or discipline or both. But for the third and subsequent offenses, the principal must develop an individual intervention plan, which must be approved by the superintendent, and it can include remedial action, progressive discipline, or both, and may require the student, accompanied by the parent or guardian, to complete a class or training program to reduce the instances of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And I will tell you that that is going to be a very big deal. That is a game changer. On all occasions, a copy of the results of the investigation must now be placed in the student's record. We never did that before. So now the HIV determination, if there's found to be a violation, it will go into the student's permanent record.
Both the victim and the offender?
The offender.
Okay.
Yes.
The question, it talks about third or fourth, but what if that first conduct is so egregious? Could that requirement, the training requirement, go into effect?
Yes. Yes, and when you take up the review of your policy to incorporate all of these requirements, and these were enacted into law, so this is not going to change. The governor signed this legislation 2 weeks ago. So when you revise your policy to incorporate these in, you will have the ability, these are the minimal requirements, you will have the ability to transfer that to a first or second offense if it's particularly egregious. Districts must provide a means for parents or guardians to confidentially report acts of harassment, intimidation, and bullying using an online form that will be developed by the Department of Education. Written reports to the principal must be on a form that will be developed by the Department of Education. So now the principals are going to have to complete a document identifying every preliminary determination where they find that it does not meet the harassment, intimidation, and bullying threshold. There's going to be real accountability required of our principals here. It has to be kept on file, not in any student record. The superintendent and the board must provide a signed statement to the principal attesting to the fact that they have reviewed the form, which shall be kept on file with the report. And the principal now has to keep a written record of the date, time, and manner of notification to parents and guardians. Because there has been a consistent concern expressed by parents that they're not kept informed about this process, both when it's initiated, what it means, what they can expect, when they will get the decision, when it will go to the board. So now the principals are going to have to keep a written record identifying the date, times, and manners of notifications to parents and guardians. New position, School Climate Stay Coordinator is going to be established to serve as a resource to all of us. And the current version of that guidance, which is the NJDOE guidance document on the anti-bullying Bill of Rights, is going to have to be posted on the district's homepage. So not just our policy, but the state's guidance for parents and guardians will have to be posted on our homepage as well. The following amendments are effective immediately. And this is for cyberbullying. This is for things that happen on social media. Those now are prosecuted under the Juvenile Code of Criminal Justice. These changes in the law that went into effect immediately affect parents and guardians. And so now the law provides for civil liability of a parent or a guardian who demonstrates willful or wanton disregard in the exercise of supervising their children in order to control their conduct with regard to cyber harassment. They've also increased the fines that can be imposed against parents and guardians with regard to cyber harassment that their children are responsible for. The big game changer here, civil liability for parents and guardians where their son or daughter has been adjudicated delinquent of cyber harassment.
Yes.
Big deal, never happened before.
Yeah, that's huge.
Any questions?
Any other questions from the board? Phyllis.
Phil,
I guess, one thing I am concerned about is getting, I guess, parent parental input. Many times I know students are afraid to tell teachers the full extent of how hurt they are by something, or they're afraid that there'll be repercussions from other students for them, having told those things. And is it going to be, or is it better for us to talk to the parents and receive that information from them so that we get a more accurate understanding rather than just saying, did the kid want to come to school, or did the kid come to school? They may have been at home not wanting to come to school and the parent made them. Just different things like that. Is that something we can get and include in the investigation? Also, I want to ask if, this is going to seem strange, but let's say a parent, an adult, does something offensive on the web. Let's say somebody is in blackface, a parent is in blackface, and students see it on the web. Could that, and are offended by it, could that be an HID at the school or not?
If the parent was the offender, I do not believe that the law would cover that, but our other policies would. So what I mean by that is that if a parent had done what you just described, then I think that the superintendent and the board would have the ability to impose sanctions on that parent. And that the sanctions that could be imposed would be depriving them of the right to come on our campuses. We would have the ability under our visitors policy to be able to sanction the parent, but I do not believe that we would have jurisdiction under this law to make a finding of harassment, intimidation, and bullying. But I certainly think that we would also refer that to the Montgomery Township Police Department for the potential of that constituting a hate crime. And the other question that you asked me is what about parental input? I think parental input is appropriate as part of our investigation. And I would certainly suggest that when we come back together as a board after the superintendent makes a recommendation for the policy revisions consistent with the new law, that could be incorporated into our policy.
I'm also assuming this is going to make things so much more expensive. At least our appeals in the past have been just about a lot of parents very afraid that something would be in their record and it would hurt their chances to get into college. Before we could say that it wasn't going to be in their college application. Will we still be able to say that, or will there be more parents, appealing?
We will no longer be able to say that, and I think you are going to see an uptick in the number of cases that may come before the board next year. Yes.
So going back to Phyllis's point about input, taking it a step further, can a parent be interviewed as a witness in an HIV investigation?
Yes.
So I'm just thinking about children who are introverts that do not feel comfortable telling their story to a teacher, counselor, ABS coordinator.
The answer is yes. They can be interviewed. Very often parents are the complainants. It is very often the parents that will actually initiate the complaint on behalf of their child. Then, as far as I'm concerned, they have to produce a written report to us, just as anybody else would under the statute, Mr. Todd. And so in that situation, I would see them as being an indispensable witness to be interviewed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to introduce our Director of Equity, Data, and Accountability, Ms. Stacy Young. She will be presenting on the district's Start Strong data.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Stacy Young, Director of Equity, Data, and Accountability. And I'm here tonight to share out the results from our Fall 2021 administration of Start Strong for state mandate. I want to begin by thanking our Assessment Curriculum and Instruction Committee, and particularly the board members who sit on that committee, for allowing me to preview this presentation, and for really providing invaluable feedback in response to it, both as board members and as parents. So thank you for that opportunity. I also want to thank our school test coordinators for their tireless efforts in the prepping and planning and administering of the assessment. So thank you to them as well. I'm going to begin with a brief overview of the assessment itself. Start Strong is an anti-DOE standardized assessment that assesses students in ELA, mathematics, and science. What's unique about Start Strong is that the content of the assessment is based on a subset of priority prior year academic standards, and I will talk a little bit more about what that means in the next slide. It was administered in 45 to 60 minutes per subject, and also unique to Start Strong is that it was able to provide us with some immediate results to educators in the assessment platform. We administered Start Strong back in October, and the reason why we did that is twofold. First, it was intended to provide us information with the potential needs of students given the turbulence of the COVID-19 pandemic and the necessary implementation of remote learning, and also because it satisfied federal statewide assessment requirements to administer general assessment in ELA, mathematics, and science for the 2020 and 21 school year. As you might recall, we did not administer NJSLA that year. I do want to be clear that although Start Strong was administered this past October, it does not replace the upcoming spring 2022 administration of the NJSLA, nor is it predictive of their results. As previously mentioned, the content of the Start Strong assessment was based on priority prior year academic standards, so we're going to take a look at what that means through this chart. As you can see on the left-hand side here, we have the three content areas that were assessed, ELA, mathematics, and science. In the center there are the grades or course that a student is currently in the 2021-22 school year. And to the right of that is the content of the assessment that they would have taken. So for example, if we look across that top row, if a student took the English Language Arts assessment and is currently in grade 4, they would have been assessed on grade 3 content. If a student is currently in grade 5, they would have been assessed on grade 4 content, and so on and so forth. The Start Strong assessments were able to provide us with information about the levels of support that a student might need in a particular subject area. So it produced these three descriptors here: strong support, some support, and less support in these, and I have them in these traditional traffic light colors so that our digestion of the results might be a little easier.
Thank you.
Start Strong also produced individual student reports, or ISRs. There was an ISR for every subject that a student tested in. The ISR outlines the major concepts covered on the assessment and how the student scored on those concepts. And it also suggests whether a student needs strong, some, or less support, as previously mentioned, in that particular subject area. These ISRs were uploaded to the Genesis Parent Portal in December. They are still available. But if any parents or caregivers are having trouble accessing it, they are welcome to reach out to their building vice principals or to myself. We'll begin by taking a look at our district analysis. In this presentation, you'll notice that I have the data presented in two forms. For the purposes of this presentation, we are going to focus on the bar graph forms, but I did want to leave these in there given that the presentation will be uploaded to two spots on the district website, under the BOE tab under Board Presentations and the Assessment tab. But again, for our purposes, we're going to go ahead and focus on the bar graphs. What we're looking at here is our English Language Arts scores. As you can see, going across the bottom are all of the grade levels that took the ELA Start Strong assessment, so grades 4 through 10. And then all the way to the right is an average. And as we can see here, looking at the average all the way to the right, we have 71% of our students in the green are requiring less support, 17% in the yellow or some, or 12% requiring strong support. I do want to note here, grade 4, as you can see here, grade 4, we are acknowledging that students are coming in at 21% requiring strong support, which is a little more significant than the other grade levels, but also acknowledging that those students were in grade 3 last year, which is a transition year for our students here in Montgomery, in addition to the fact that their early childhood, their first and second grade, was disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Looking next at our mathematics scores, we can see a couple of grade levels in courses with percentages of students requiring strong support hovering around 20 to 25%. You can see here that mathematics was assessed in grades 4 to 8, and in Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, which are mixed grade levels. And we can see here that grades 4, 8, and Algebra 2 are coming in a little higher in terms of requiring strong support at 21, 26, and 32% respectively. And again, the average is all the way to the right. Taking a look here at science, we can see that science was assessed in grades 6, 9, and 12, and then all the way to the right is again that average. And noting that the most significant need here is in grade 12, with 28% of students in the red are requiring strong support. And with that, we've summarized our district data by grade, and now we'll take a look at the same data by subgroup. Now, as the Director of Equity, I would be remiss not to acknowledge that the way that our state identifies race is limiting. And it certainly forces people to fit into boxes that may not adequately represent or affirm their identities. So we move through this subgroup data acknowledging that fact and knowing that our students and people are more than these identity markers. So with that said, taking a look at ELA first by race, we can see here our subgroups on the bottom. We've got Asian, Black, Hispanic, multiple, and white. Our subgroup requiring the least support in ELA, as we can see here, are students who identify as Asian, coming in at 78% in the green. We can see then it's followed by our students who identify as white at 64%, students who are multiracial at 63%, and then followed by our students who identify as Hispanic at 58% in the green and 52% in the green, meaning requiring less support. We'll take a look then at our mathematics scores by race. We're seeing a similar pattern to ELA, with the subgroup requiring the least amount of support as students who identify as Asian at 73%, and multiracial at 61% in the green, requiring less support. And then we begin to see a more significant disparity as we take a look at our students who identify as white at 43% in the green, requiring less support, Hispanic at 38% in the green, and Black at 25% in the green, again requiring less support in mathematics. And now taking a look at science, remembering that science is assessed in grades 6, 9, and 12. We've got, again, a similar pattern, consistent still with our science results. The subgroup requiring the least support are students who identify as Asian at 58%, followed by our students who identify as multiracial at 48%, our students who identify as white at 35% in the green, our students who identify as Hispanic at 23% in the green, and our students who identify as Black as 10% in the green, requiring less support. We'll take a look then at our data, same data for our subgroup programs. And we can see going across the bottom here, we have free and reduced lunch, section 504, ELL, our English language learners, special education, and then our general education all the way to the right there for comparison. It is important for us to keep in mind as we look at this data that a student can count in more than one category. So you can have a student that qualifies for free and reduced lunch and also has a 504 and is also an English language learner. So that's important to keep in mind as we look at this data. In terms of our ELA results, which is what is projected here, we can note that our students needing the least support, or section 504, coming in at 73% in the green. And then we can see here that our students who are Ls or receive special education services and free and reduced lunch are coming in as needing the most strong support at 51% for our English language learners, 34% for our special education population, and 32% in the red requiring strong support in English language arts. Taking a look then at science, we can see our free and reduced lunch and special education students are in similar need, requiring strong support at 48 and 54% respectively. And our science results, as we can see, there's a need for strong support across multiple groups, with free and reduced lunch coming in at 48%, 45%. Our English language learners at 46%, special education at 53%, strong support in the red for science. There are a few key takeaways that the Department of Ed feel are important to share, and that's the results of the Start Strong assessment mirror historical trends in New Jersey standardized assessment data. In other words, they're not seeing anything drastically different than in years past. The observations from the Start Strong assessment are consistent with national pandemic era observations, including that unfinished learning, which is a term that refers to concepts that students have not mastered yet, may be greater in math than in reading. Unfinished learning may be greater for elementary students than for older students. And for our historically underserved student populations, our most marginalized populations, those gaps are continuing to persist. So in thinking of our students who require some support and strong support, I'm going to share just a few of the intervention strategies that are in place. I'll begin with these overarching interventions, including that our content area supervisors work closely with teachers in identifying standards, skills, and concepts that are not adequately grasped. Our student performance is regularly monitored, analyzed, and discussed by staff, including teachers, counselors, and administrators at regular team and department meetings. And of course, data is continuously used to help determine the efficacy of our instructional practices. It's also important to keep in mind that we use the New Jersey tiered system of supports, which is a framework of supports and interventions intended to improve student achievement. And so you can see here that it's characterized by 3 tiers. Tier 1, the universal support for all students, is that natural differentiation that occurs in the classroom that's applicable to all students. If a student continues to be challenged by any number of standard skills or concepts, we move into Tier 2, which is that targeted classroom support that is specific to that individual student. And should a student continue to face challenges, then we move into that Tier 3, which is the referral and evaluation process, in other words, classification. And then what you see here are additional intervention strategies broken down by grade band. And we see we have elementary here, just grade 4 as Start Strong was only assessed in grade 4 at the elementary level. And we can see here that our Start Strong assessment results were used during the data days, which are a deep dive into student achievement, held at the elementary school to aid with academic support decisions. We can see that one of the intervention strategies are flexible classroom-based strategy groups. So in other words, students don't necessarily work in the same groups all the time. They might switch groups in order to work with students that are also facing similar challenges with particular standards or skills or concepts. And there is a reading specialist that does support our teachers with those targeted classroom supports. At the middle level, we see again informed groupings as well, in addition to one-on-one conferencing. They also have mandated flex time for those students who are in need of the strong support, who were in the red. And most of those strong support students and some support students were discussed at guidance and admin meetings to see if there were any correlations that could be noted. And in terms of our high school students, we do see a little more self-efficacy with the older students, and so there's an opportunity for them to take charge of their learning through after-school support, which the teachers offer. There is a mandatory study hall for each high school student, in addition to 2 lab courses, a mathematics lab course and a literacy skills lab course that are for students who just demonstrate a more significant skill deficiency, so those strong support students. And I do need to end on this note, which is directly from the New Jersey Department of Ed as well. In consideration with the different design and purpose of Start Strong as compared to NJSLA, the NJDOE strongly discourages districts from comparing any individual student's school or district Start Strong data to any state level data for Start Strong or any NJSLA data. And with that, thank you so much for your time. Are there any questions?
Do any board members have any questions for Ms. Young at this time? Rich?
Thank you, and I appreciate the fact that at the end, they gave us the data, but you also told us, what it meant, because, the so what is the important thing. I did have a couple of questions. So partly this was brought on, I think you may have said, because of the pandemic and the concern about learning loss results and that.
Yes.
You also noted that there are subgroup differences, there were subject differences. And so comparing this last statement to one of the slides, you said it mirrors historical trends of things. I don't know if that meant Montgomery trends, or I guess I'm trying to understand is, are the anomalies or differences we may have seen there things that we would have seen in previous New Jersey SLA testing likely?
Yes, that's exactly what that means.
Okay.
But it is referring to statewide data,
Okay.
not specific to Montgomery.
And my second question is, how will we know that these interventions were successful?
If we see an improvement in student achievement and a number of different measures that we use throughout the school year, then I think we'll know that the interventions are successful.
Okay, so teachers will be doing assessments just like they normally
Absolutely.
do across the board, and so you're hoping that we're not going to test them with this, are we?
Correct. No, we will not be.
Okay. So I'll be interested in future times to talk more about the, just general trends and what we're doing about it and things.
Certainly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board?
Yes, sorry. Was there, the logic of not testing science every year? I sort of feel like that was a disadvantage for almost, have to remember all those things for the past 3 years, whereas every other year, you were tested every year.
So was the question?
Was that statement required?
Yes. That was dictated by the state, the grade 6, 9, and 12 for science.
And this is standardized test, right? We're given to make these assessments?
Correct.
All right, I guess one, my other question is, if someone had gotten a perfect score, would they still have been defined as less support needed?
Yes.
Okay. not many of you, it's just scary. I mean, we knew that we were going to have problems. This has been a terrible 2 years, and it definitely hurt children. I'm wondering if we thought about maybe doing 12-month school, or longer days, or after-school help for all of the schools instead of just the high school. And in terms of, I think Rich kind of asked about the intervention strategies, if they've been successful in the past, but we don't really know. And I am concerned that the high school stuff all seems to be pretty independent. That, it's like just to go to study hall, just to, it's more, labs, it's something that the students have to do on their own and not really are being supported. And so I am concerned, but I also want to ask, what do you need from us? I mean, what do we need to do to make this better, to really provide everything that they need to get better or to get back to different levels? I'm not sure we have enough yet. And I'm just wondering what other ideas you all have, what else we can do to help.
Well, I think our assessment, curriculum, and instruction committee is tasked with reflecting and analyzing and discussing the data further and using that to inform whether or not the efficacy of our instructional practices is valid. And so I think that that's the place and that's the avenue for us to continue those discussions. Are there any additional questions from the board? Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Young.
Thank you, Ms. Young.
At this time, I'd like to introduce our district's Director of Safety and Security, Mr. Tom Wayne. He will be providing us with a district safety and security update.
Thank you, sir. Hi, good evening. Good to see everybody. A special welcome to our new board members, Mr. Carlson and Ms. Spina. Thank you very much for serving your community in this role. It's really appreciated. Of course, congratulations to our new president and co-vice presidents. So it's good to see everybody. So let me just start with a brief introduction for those who I have not met yet. I retired at the end of 2019 after 26 years with Montgomery Township Police, and was incredibly fortunate in February of 20 to be hired here in the district as the first ever Director of Safety and Security. And it's a role I really enjoyed. I have to credit the administrative team here for allowing me to be a part of just about every aspect of the district operation. I've been invited into like the ALT, the DLT. These are different, leadership teams within the district, and it's really allowed me to get a 360-degree view of the district and to do my job better, quite frankly, by having that view. I meet regularly with the principals, of course, almost daily, and I go to the faculty meetings, and just being able to be part of all of that really allows me to do my job much better, and that's a credit to the administrators here. You heard me say that I was hired in February of 20, right? So we all know what happened a month later, right? So I get hired in February of 20 with this, grand scheme of how I'm going to make everybody safe and secure, and it's going to be wonderful. And then a few weeks into my tenure, COVID hits, and I'm in charge of keeping schools with nobody in them safe and secure. It was a difficult time. But I learned a word that I hadn't used much as a cop, and that was pivot. And I've used that word about 1,000 times in the last 2 years and heard it used. We have to pivot a lot, right? And certainly COVID has caused us to do that. So I pivoted. I learned everything I could know about COVID and used some of my past connections in the township with the health department and, of course, law enforcement and emergency services. And I got to know our district physician really well, and I learned a lot from him. And he spoke, I listened. And, I kind of became, not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but someone who was the conduit to all of those different entities, right? The school nurses, the administrative team, the police department, the health department. I was kind of that central figure. And we started meeting weekly. We've been meeting weekly ever since. We have another meeting this Thursday to discuss COVID. And sometimes we meet more than once a week if circumstances dictate. And I really think that we've worked really, really well together under difficult circumstances to try to make, tough decisions, of course, with the guidance of our health department and our health experts, right? So thank goodness for them. And just quickly, the nurses, I have to tell you how in awe I have been of the school nurses in the past 2 years. They work tirelessly. I'm the safety security guy, so I knew what I signed up for. I was a cop for 26 years, working weekends, getting calls at night. That's something that I'm very used to, and it doesn't bother me. These nurses have worked evenings, weekends. COVID cases don't know it's a holiday weekend, right?
There are no boundaries with COVID.
Wait, I'm sorry?
There are no boundaries with COVID.
Correct. And but they don't complain. They do their job really, really well, and it's been a pleasure to work with them. To try to help keep our community safe. So they've done a great job. But I'd be lying to you if I said that a lot of my job for the last few years wasn't somehow COVID related. And that doesn't mean that we're not addressing other important security concerns. We are. But, on a given day, depending on what's going on, probably half to more than half of my day does revolve around something with COVID, right? Because I do all staff contact tracing. So any staff member that has COVID, that of course gets to me. They usually either call me or email me that fact, and then I do a contact trace investigation and then follow up with their potential close contacts. So unfortunately, when people see Tom Wayne calling them lately for the last couple of years, it's never like a really hearty hello when they answer. It's usually a very tentative, sheepish, oh no, right? Why are you? I'm not calling to unfortunately wish you a happy day or whatever. So it's usually to ask a couple of questions about contact tracing. But again, the nurses focus on the kids. I focus on the staff. We're constantly crossing over, obviously, because they're contacting each other. And I think by and large we've done a really good job getting on top of that really, really quickly. And again, trying to keep everybody safe. But like I said, we do meet every Thursday, and that is multi-jurisdictional. That's our health department. That is our physician. That is a representative from every school, usually the principal. And of course, our top administrative team. We all meet, and we have another big agenda this Thursday to discuss some things. I also help administer the weekly testing program that we have to do of our staff, right? So as you know, it was mandated by the governor that folks who chose either to not be vaccinated or not disclose their vaccination status had to submit to weekly testing. And I and a woman in human resources named Stacy O'Neill, who is another person I have to mention, consummate professional. She has been wonderful in helping me with this program, with all COVID things. She and I, pretty much any case that comes in involving the staff, including this testing program, have worked together hand in hand with, of course, Kelly Mattis, who's our boss, who oversees the entire thing. And again, I'm not to, toot our own horns, but I think we've managed that really, really well. And Stacy has been phenomenal in that area. So, that's enough on COVID. Hope we have a day where I can come here and not talk at all about COVID, but I'd be lying if I said that part of my role, and of course part of keeping the district safe and secure, has been battling COVID for the last couple of years. But on to other things and other areas that I thought I'd be doing more of when I started. Infrastructure is incredibly important, and I think it's important to harden our targets and spend money wisely where we can with infrastructure. And I'm going to talk about some of those initiatives in a second related to the grant we just got. But I believe, and I know a lot of you probably share this belief, that we're going to keep kids safe, yes, with infrastructure and spending money on wisely. But I believe relationships, trusting relationships, are going to keep kids safe. I really believe that. And the past 2 years I've spent trying to establish those relationships with my fellow colleagues, staff members, but with the kids as well. We know that research says that 80% of school violence perpetrators had either told someone or people saw obvious signs that they were about to snap. And a lot of times those people who saw those things and knew those things didn't tell anyone. They weren't quite sure who to tell. And I'm trying to help, I can't do this alone, but I'm trying to help facilitate a climate and culture here where our kids and our staff do feel comfortable approaching a trusted adult with a concern like that. And again, I know I can't do it alone, but I know we have the people here that care about these kids incredibly. You know, I was an admirer of the district in my role in the police department for years, but from afar. And people would call up the police department and ask about potentially moving to Montgomery and crime statistics and whatnot, and they would get to my desk. And ultimately they would ask about the schools. And I would tell them, listen, I would send my two kids, who are now well in their 20s, but I would send my children to those schools without question. From what I know of those schools and the reputation and my interactions, I would send them to the second. Well, this past 2 years has only heightened that belief, really. I'm impressed every day with the professionalism and the dedication that I see, and you know, I'm just, like I said, thrilled to be a part of it. But I do believe that mindset of, you know, being safe in school and knowing that there are trusted adults that you can go to talk to about a concern, that, along with hardening our target, is going to keep us safe. And that's my goal over the next, you know, couple of years, certainly, while I'm here. You know, also, we have a district safety team that meets regularly. That, again, I organize multi-jurisdictional law enforcement and emergency services. We meet to discuss various safety items. So that's some of the things that have been going on recently. And of course, the exciting thing that this is the Alyssa's Law grant that we recently got. I'll give you a little background on that. This young lady, Alyssa, whose parents spearheaded this law, she was the victim of the Parkland, Florida tragedy a couple years ago, right? And her parents decided, hey, we're going to honor her memory by spearheading this law, which is going to require all schools in New Jersey to have a silent panic alarm that goes directly to local law enforcement. You know, I sat down with Mrs. Shower, and I said, listen, we have this existing Share 911, and it appears to fit all the criteria of the mandate for Alyssa's Law. And so she helped me, Dave Palumbo helped me, submit that as our piece to satisfy that for the Alyssa's Law requirement. We submitted it, waited a long time, as you always do, and we're told, yes, it does fit the requirement, which was wonderful for us, because now we could apply for the grant. Again, with their help, we did so, waited again for a long time, and we're finally awarded our piece, which, you know, we were thrilled about. So, you know, again, I go and talk to all the stakeholders in the district. I meet everybody. I talk to, of course, building principals, but I want to talk to the people, the custodians, transportation. They really know what's going on. The kitchen folks who do a wonderful job, they're the ones that give me the best input and insights into what's going on in the schools, quite frankly. And I've taken all this into consideration in meeting with Ms. Mattis and meeting with Ms. Shower. You know, we've decided to allocate that money in a couple of ways. 1/3 of the money is going towards, and this is, again, we're very fortunate, if you had a component like Share 911 that already fit the criteria for Alyssa's Law, you could use the monies to pay for that program, both retroactively and in the future, right? So we could use some of the money to pay for past expenditures for Share 911 and future. So that's 1/3 of the grant is approximately going to that. 1/3 is going to be a surveillance, indoor-outdoor surveillance system at our upper middle school, this campus right here, which, you know, we're excited about. We thought was overdue. And then another 1/3 are for upgrades and enhancements to the entrance areas to all of our schools, right? All 5 schools are going to, you know, get a serious upgrade in security enhancements at the front entrances. So that is that's our plan for spending that money. Once I'm allowed to, you know, the business administrator, they're weird about not letting you spend money until it hits the accounts, which I'm not quite sure how that works, but she assures me she'll let me know when it hits our accounts and I get the green light to spend. I'm ready to spend it, and I'm really excited about it. So, you know, that's my security update, as it were, and I'd be happy to address any questions. Mr. Todd, yes, sir.
No worries, sir. First of all, thank you for your service to the township.
Thank you.
Thank you for the new role with the school. I want to say 2019 was a great year retired. I appreciate that. What is the total amount of the grant?
The total amount is $267,000. Yep.
And Mr. Wynn, can you tell us what the expenditures will look like for that grant funding?
I sure can. So
Great.
yep, so the 1/3 is gonna pay for past expenditures for Share 911 up to date.
Current.
To current. So a third of it will go towards that, recouping those monies.
Okay,
Yeah, the second third, if you will be spent here at this building to upgrade, to put in a new surveillance system of cameras indoor and outdoor here in this building.
is that a new installation?
That's, yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then the final third will be spent on each building, an enhanced security system at each front entrance of each building, okay?
So describe for us what that will look like.
Yeah, sure. So you've heard of visitor management systems, where you have to, right, give your ID into a visitor management system, a freestanding like database.
Mhm.
We're going to put those at each of the 5 schools, where an individual that wants to visit the school will have to interface with this before they even enter the school, right? So there'll be a vestibule area that they'll be allowed to go into, but they're not going to go past the locked doors. They now have to provide an ID into the visitor management system. That system will run them through several databases, including the sex offender registry and some other databases. And they'll have to explain on a keyboard what their purpose of their visit is. And at some point, a visitor's badge with their photo from their driver's license will be on it that they can put on. Only then will they be permitted past the second set of doors into the building to conduct whatever visit they may need to conduct. So the goal is to have those visitor management systems at each of our 5 buildings with this money.
And that funding will provide all the sources that we need for these materials and supplies.
Yes, so yeah, we had to submit those numbers, to the state when we were applying for the grant. So yeah, we're going to be fine with that number. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for that detailed description.
Yeah.
I think there's more questions. Christina's next.
So when you said you were installing the cameras into this, you do a whole new installation, that's just confirming that all the other buildings do have cameras?
They do not.
They don't? Okay, so you're
The
starting
high
with...
school does.
The high school does,
Yeah.
but the other ones don't. So you're going to start here first, and eventually the plan is to probably get cameras for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
And understand that, there are certain things that I probably would rather address with you guys in the executive session.
Particularly about cameras.
Yes, yeah, right, yeah, like I would answer any question you guys have, but some might not be appropriate in this forum.
Right.
But certainly, if you ever want me to come to executive session, you have specific questions, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I think
We'll do that.
Because I think my question about the surveillance was going to be
So
something.
we'll do that. Thank you,
Gotcha.
Mr. Fogarty.
But I guess
I'm on call.
one question I came to ask about, the system you talked about where they feed their driver's license, I know like the State House has that too.
Yep.
So what happens if something pops?
Yeah, call Tom Wayne.
So,
I mean-
once again, I believe this is executive discussion.
Yeah.
This is an
Okay,
executive
good,
session
good,
question,
yeah.
Patrick.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Fogarty.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So just so the members of the public know that any issues with regard to the security of our schools is appropriate for executive discussion, so that we're not letting anybody know where the security is or is not.
Sorry. Over the kid.
No. I need you with me at all times. Appreciate that. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah,
So I appreciate it when you said that, building relationships not only with staff, but also with the students. Like, how do you envision doing that as you, now
Yeah.
that you're in person and
Yeah.
you're getting to meet the kids? Like, what does that look like?
Wonderful question. I have been asked to go into classrooms and speak, right? So Zorn Village has a crime and punishment class at the high school.
Yeah.
And I go into that class as much as I can to talk to the kids. And my goal is to try to be invited into as many classrooms as I can for these kids to get to know me as just, a friend, a regular person, right? Not the ex-cop who they may not trust, right? Now, in my role with the PD, I was very active in the schools, right? I was When the middle school opened in early 2000s, I was the first school resource officer there, and I was the first school resource officer at the high school when it opened in 2006. I also taught the DARE program for like 5 years, very early in my career. So I was no stranger to the schools throughout my career, and I felt that those types of programs broke those walls down between law enforcement and kids, and that trust was definitely there. So my goal, especially when COVID finally is off the table, is to be in the lunchrooms with the kids, sitting down and having lunch and saying hello, to be in as many classrooms as I can, to teach driver's ed to the sophomores from the perspective of a law enforcement officer, right? That's the only way I can get them to know me and to trust me, is to be among them and for them to see that I'm just a person, another resource in this community of wonderful resources that they can go to with a problem or report if they see something that they see as dangerous. Like, hey, you know, that guy seems like someone I can go talk to. But that's how I plan on getting there. And it takes time.
Thank you.
You know?
Thank you, Mr. Wayne, so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so now it's time for public comment. I have a statement here I must read. Members of the public are allotted one opportunity to bring any new business to the board to a maximum of 3 minutes per speaker. All comments or questions must be directed to the board president. The Board of Education welcomes and encourages input from the public. There will be 2 times during this meeting for the public to speak. One time is now for any new business, where members are invited to bring that business for up to 3 minutes. Later in the meeting, the public will have an opportunity to submit questions specific to the action agenda. Okay. So before you make your comment, please state your name, address, and subject matter. Being mindful of privacy rights regarding students and board employees, and to avoid any potential liability on the part of the speaker, the board discourages references to specific individuals. While directing your comments or questions to the board president, please understand that the public comment portions of the meeting are not structured as question and answer sessions, but rather are offered as opportunities for you to share your thoughts with the board. The board president may need to refer an issue to the superintendent or the superintendent's designee if the particular issue has not been handled through the appropriate chain of command with the school district before coming to the board for a response. Responses may be provided at the end of this session. However, there are times when comments and questions will require additional information or fact gathering before a response is provided. So, Ms. Shower?
And please sign in at the notebook there indicating your name and your address.
Thank you.
So at this time, public comment is open.
So I actually brought 2 of my kids, but one has so much homework she freaked out, so I had to leave.
Could you sign in, please? Thank you.
Sure.
My name is Hanya Jernigan, and I go to Lowell Middle School. I'm curious as to why I need to wear my mask outdoors. According to the CDC guidelines, there is no reason that my peers and I should have to wear them. I would also like to mention the environment at school. It has been unpleasant, and it also affected my learning and still is today. How am I supposed to concentrate when I have a piece of cloth over my face? I also believe we should be able to have mask breaks. When we are not able to breathe and pull our mask down, we immediately get yelled at to pull it back up. I hope you can consider revising these rules in the future and understand how much this has affected me and multiple other people at school. Thank you for your time this evening.
And I just wanted to follow up with one item. I think what I've observed, and both of my kids were here tonight, is that you talk about ethics today, and as a parent having kids, and I have to say this hasn't been the easiest year for them, and for many others, I'm sure. But one of the things that I believe is totally unacceptable at this point in time is for teachers giving medical advice to our students, which I don't believe it's legal. It's always been kind of a private approach and using their classroom to, I will use that word, scare tactics, right? Fear about COVID, instead of teaching them to think strategically, ask good questions, and most importantly, focus on the subjects that need to be learned. I mean, you saw some of the numbers from the results. We're obviously, as parents, are very concerned about where our kids are and how much catching up they have to do. So I don't believe that teachers are in the position to talk about either COVID, vaccine, or politics. And what you heard today, you know, I've been here in September, I don't know if you recall, I asked the question to the superintendent, why are the kids masked outdoors? Here we are, you know, February, January, and our kids are still wearing masks outdoors, and I just find it completely unacceptable and kind of abusive towards the kids, and the fact that their voices are not being heard. This is part of the reason I wanted to bring my kids, so you heard it not just from me, because I hear it from them every day, but also from them directly, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sheridan Hotum. I'm a mom to two bright dyslexics, a veteran Montessori teacher, a certified academic language therapist. I've dedicated my life to remediating dyslexic and struggling learners. I am the parent who was muted at the meeting last Wednesday. I am one of many who have been muted by teachers and administrators. For years, parents like myself have been privately muted behind closed doors and from behind screens through email. I represent the thousands of children who have been muted by not being taught to read with proper instruction. We are supposed to be a community, a body with different strengths, weaknesses, and functions. I believe the body needs all of its parts working in tandem to achieve its highest level of health. The hand cannot tell the eye it is not needed. The elbow must be employed for the arm to function properly. When a person or a small group of people decide to mute parts of the body fails. And in the case of literacy, children fail. Will you take the courageous and bold steps needed to prevent our youngest learners from failing? Will you mandate meaningful professional development training in the science of reading? Will you refuse to continue investing in debunked curriculum instead of buying the rewrite? When leaders who are supposed to listen, advocate, and make meaningful change continue to silence concerned and knowledgeable parents and struggling children, our children lose the basic human right to fulfill their greatest purpose. I look forward to being contacted by courageous members of the community who are ready for change in the literacy numbers and are no longer willing to mute truth. In honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, I ask you, the board, Montgomery residents, how will you use your voice to make change for our youngest learners? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I am wearing jogging pants. That's on the record.
And your mask.
Duly noted.
Gotta be comfortable at these late hours. Chris Wilson, Carriage Trail, talking about literacy and special education. Thank you, Madam President. I am also a member of our Special Education Parent Advisory Group Steering Committee, CPAG for short, which is a state mandated body required by districts to provide input on systemic issues for the special education community. I'd like to thank Ms. Young for her Start Strong presentation. As students serviced by special education were identified as needing particularly additional support, I ask that you, the Board of Ed, and leadership throughout the district continue to communicate with MCPAC, as you have done in the past, to receive our input on challenges that we see and opportunities for improvement. Regarding HIB, I'd like to note that students with disabilities are often particularly at risk of HIB incidents. And this is an area of deep concern for our community, as it is for all communities. So again, appreciate your continued partnership and collaboration in having those conversations with CPAG regarding HIB. Regarding what other things we can do to help, Ms. Bursch asked what more we can do to help, and forgive me if I got the title wrong, if it's doctor or something else, Ms. Bursch. But I think that a logical inference based on the data is that our K-3 students would have been similarly affected by learning loss as their grades 4+ peers, or even affected to a greater degree with more serious needs. So I'd ask the board to ask district leadership what intervention strategies are taking place for K-3 students, such as my own second grader who's never known a normal school year without disruption, as has been the case for all second graders. And I'd also like to offer a few additional solutions, suggestions, or strategies for consideration as pertains to literacy at the K-3 level. First of all, we can improve our curriculum and instruction by eliminating guessing and cueing, which you see throughout our curriculum guides for both reading and foundational skills. Eliminate Fontes Pinnell's leveled literacy intervention for first intervention for students who struggle to read, as it is widely considered ineffective by both the research base and the International Dyslexia Association. I have more ideas, but I do want to get to the NJSLA data as it relates to Start Strong. I see the Start Strong data as consistent with past NJSLA data, demonstrating consistent achievement gaps among our traditionally underserved communities and our special education students. So I think, rather than just reflecting on what we're doing now and kind of modifying around the edges, I think a broader conversation about curriculum and instruction, broader changes are warranted, because we're continuing to see consistent achievement gaps. And then the last thing I'd like to say is that regarding masks, if they must be worn, it's been my personal experience. I don't know that this is a systemic issue, but I think it warrants consideration that clear masks, which I believe are recommended by the CDC, are not being used by speech-language therapists or teachers of students with special needs who might particularly benefit from being able to see facial expressions, as well as students of very young children who also benefit as they're developing phonological awareness and so on. So I don't know that they're being used or that they're being used consistently. And if you do a quick YouTube search for how to keep your mask from fogging up, it's really easy to do. I would ask that we take that under consideration as well. Thank you again so much for your time, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. So first, I know that Ms. Willeka has departed to go home, but she brought up the issue, she and her daughter of wearing masks, not wearing masks outside, and the adverse affiliations that her daughter and others experience and or report. And it's my understanding that our superintendent, Mary, our assistant superintendent, sitting for her tonight, Mr. Papa, Damien, principal from each of our 5 schools, a principal and or vice principal, our Director of Special Services, Kristen Taylor, a nurse representative, as well as Mr. Tom Wayne, participate on a weekly evidence-based conversation about the COVID-19 related safety practices and protocols. And participatory in those Thursday meetings is the Montgomery Health Department and our district physician. So it's my understanding the next meeting is scheduled to take place this Thursday, January 28th. Mr. Papa, is that correct?
That is correct, Madam President.
Okay, great. And we will evaluate the addendum to the executive order that states the permissibility, if you will, of being maskless when outdoors during school-sponsored time. Okay, second, and I do apologize, ma'am, I was not able to capture your name, but you and Mr. Wilson as well addressed the literacy curriculum currently being implemented here in Montgomery schools. And as a board and the district personnel, those that are present and not, really appreciate and value your relentless passion. And we are so impressed by your acumen in this area. And for those of us that are parents, we are just particularly moved by your expressions and concern, not only for your own children, but for all of our children, and with the target group of our young developmental learners from preschool to grades 4. So like all public school districts in the state, private and parochial institutions as well, there is a curriculum, and the curriculum provides that roadmap, right, for the instruction and the strategies and the resources and the programs that teachers utilize when they are instructing our students. So the Assessment, Curriculum, and Instruction Committee is a board committee, and that provides an opportunity for those participating board members to deliver that oversight to which we are charged as board members. So those 4 board members continue to be in conversation with the committee co-chair, Mr. Papa. This issue will be on our ACI agenda for the month of February, which I think is Wednesday, February 9th, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you, Mr. Papa. And as board members, and also as Mr. Fogarty explained earlier this evening, and which all board members are already aware, we are not charged with facilitating, or actually implementing these changes, and that process that takes place. It is the responsibility of our staffing to delve into identifying, the best and most appropriate programs and pedagogy, so that each and every student, regardless of their performance and achievement level, that we meet their needs and that they grow academically. So, Mr. Papa, would you like to add to that?
Madam President, absolutely, we will make sure that our agenda, which you and I do in tandem, will absolutely include this topic. I am sure our K-4 language arts supervisor will be an integral part of that conversation. As many of us know, but it always is important to reiterate, the district curriculum is available online on our district website. We also think it's very important with the high value that's placed on literacy, that an additional web page also be created And we hope to see that sometime soon in the next couple of weeks. And that webpage will be dedicated to, as I said, early literacy development. It will summarize our district's philosophy and the instructional practices. I think it will also lead to additional conversations, very similar to what we saw this evening. And looking forward to February's meeting.
Awesome, great, thank you. Yes, thank you. So, even in this late hour, at this time, we're going to move to the presentation of representative and committee reports. And since Ms. Wang has already delivered the student report, I'm going to, at this time, invite Mr. Jim Dolan, our MTEA president, for the MTEA report. Good evening, Mr. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you for hanging in there with us tonight.
Good evening, board members. I have to say, I did pick a good night to just have one topic to share.
Okay.
It's one topic I really wanted to focus on, and it's something that a lot of our board members know already. So, once again, Jim Dolan, president of the Montgomery Township Education Association. As I think you're all well aware, we went through a terrible spike in COVID cases just after the holidays. And, you know, we're very fortunate now that the cases are diminishing at this point. With the exception of a few days, you know, at the high school, our buildings had students in them. Okay? It was quite a challenge to staff those buildings. And, you know, some challenges still remain as cases still are a little high. The spike brought out varied emotions with staff that looked at the daily case count as we saw that going to 30,000 at one point. Many were fearful and anxious about contracting COVID or bringing it home to their loved ones. And we can all understand that, but we did it. You know, schools were open. Administration did a fantastic job piecing all the schedules together in order to make it work. Staff used every free moment to cover a class and worked extra hard to help a colleague who was out. COVID impacted every aspect of our school community and every job title that we have in our school district. Teachers, again, found themselves juggling in-person students and quarantine students while taking on extra responsibilities to keep buildings running smoothly, and teachers were givers, were problem solvers. Tonight, I am here because I, along with my fellow colleagues, have a problem that we can't fix alone. I have already discussed this with our HR subcommittee, and I am grateful that those members of the subcommittee were very receptive to working and finding a solution together on this. I think it's also important for the entire board to hear it as well. We have a number of staff members currently that are very low on sick days, personal days, and family illness days. You know, it's all because of COVID. And it's for, no one's fault. You might be a new teacher that started with a number of days you were sick, and now you're dangerously low. Many had to use days to quarantine because they were sick themselves or because they had children they had to take care of who needed to quarantine. If they run out of days, they end up in an unpaid status, creating a financial hardship. No member working so diligently to support students and to keep schools open should be faced with an unpaid status. This is a problem not created by any one entity, but it's a problem that we need to address together to support our staff. I want staff focused on educating students and keeping our schools running safely and smoothly, not being anxious or worried about what might happen next if they run out of days. I have already shared a list of brainstorm items with our HR committee, and I look forward to working on that with the committee. This is a top priority for our association right now. I look forward to resolving this as soon as possible so members can have a sense of security and have one less thing to worry about as they go back and teach students. So that is my one message for tonight, and the one thing members remind me of daily that's on their minds and they want resolved. So I really look forward to working with the board and HR and our superintendent to resolve that and find some resolution to support our members. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. So we really appreciate your commentary on this subject. And thank you for acknowledging that the Board Human Resources Committee is happy to continue with this work with you and others to identify a reasonable resolution to hopefully implement a support initiative for MTEA members who experience or are about to experience an unpaid situation due to specifically related to COVID. So I'm hopeful that we will work toward a solution that is fair in an effort to alleviate any real or perceived anxieties so that those kids can be on the charge at hand, which is championing and educating what's best for our students. So thank you. So now I would like to invite our board members, that are liaisons or delegates, to report out at this time.
I think the first is ACI.
No, we're doing our liaison delegate report, so I know that Mr. Carlson has a report for his attendance at a recent SEPTA meeting. Do we have any others for this area? That's the only one? Okay.
Rich, do you want to share anything since you attended the UMS PTO?
I can share a couple things.
Sure. So,
Shall I move it?
yes.
So I visited the Open Montgomery Special Education PTA meeting, SEPTA. Last Wednesday as a new Board of Education liaison. You've seen a couple of their members here tonight. There was a great deal of open conversation such that the general session went well over the expected time. But it was a good learning experience for me, so that was nice. So during this meeting, I noticed that Ms. Taylor reported on several successful federal funding requests. And then I also noted a great interest in the Start Strong program. And Heather Pena Battles overview of the language, math, and science grade coverage under this program. A lot of interest in that. And then some special topics included interest in American Sign Language teaching, additional consideration for dyslexic students, continued emphasis on the interests of special education kids and succeeding while blending in, as well as recent successes in fundraising activities. So I look forward to learning more about this group's goals as I go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Smith?
Yes, I attended the middle school PTO meeting on the 11th of January. That and the high school PTSA meeting that was, let's see, it was on the 25th, no, sorry. I think it was like the next day. That was the 13th, right? So both of those meetings had status updates by the principal, vice principals in those buildings, talking about how things were going in their buildings. Obviously, COVID was a subject that came up, and they kind of talked through as similar to Mr. Dolan, just in general, about how the staff was trying to deal with the issues and generally talking about the impacts to the students and trying to mitigate those, any problems that came up. At the middle school, they are doing a self-care day, and so there's discussion. If you're getting the PTO newsletters, you'll see that they're asking for games for kids to be able to have some downtime and try to, deal with some of the impacts that they've had because of COVID. There's a discussion about the calendar, and that's on tonight's agenda for update. And in both of the meetings, there were representatives of MSEPTA and MCPEG talking about some of their thoughts, and similar to what we've heard here tonight. And so that was kind of the primary things that came up here.
Thank you, Mr. Speck. So now our board committee reports, and I'll begin with ACI, and followed by Christina Harris, who will report out on the equity committee. So It's a pleasure to continue to serve on the community's behalf as chair of ACI, and I share this responsibility with Mr. Papa. The ACI committee met on Wednesday, January 12th. So at the beginning of the meeting, the Director of Equity, Data, and Accountability, Stacy Young, acknowledged that the district's leadership team recommended that we rewrite our vision and mission statements for the district. So both better align to reflect our current working practices and district culture. As a result, Ms. Young is currently coordinating a steering committee consisting of various stakeholders to participate in this important endeavor. The details aren't yet complete, and when identified, we will update you. She later shared the Start Strong assessment outcomes, which were presented earlier this evening. Next, the counseling director, Corey Young, reported that counselors conducted virtual college admissions workshops through high school history classes. Last Thursday, 1/20, Ms. Gaylord mediated an alumni panel where current juniors and seniors were invited to pose questions and hear about post-secondary experiences of MHS graduates. As part of the College and Career Initiative, the Department of Corrections will present to MHS students about career options in its industry on Wednesday, 2/16. Course selection for rising seniors will commence the week of 1/31, followed by subsequent grades ending with UNS 8th graders. Now, as we continue to value the health and wellness of all our students, depression screenings will begin the first week of February, starting with MHS, then UNS, and Ms. Gaylord reported having to work out a schedule with Mr. Richards at LMS. Likewise, with use of ESSER, elementary and secondary schools emergency relief funding, excuse me, we've been able to hire an additional counselor for Orchard Hill, which now has 3 counselors to better service our students, especially those exhibiting needs who are attending school in person for the first time. The scholarship applications will be open to all seniors at or around February 1st with a due date in mid-March. The annual end-of-year scholarship award ceremony is scheduled to take place in June. For more information, we encourage you to visit our counseling department's webpage. And it appears as if we've renamed our yearly counseling department's community presentation to Portrait of a Graduate. After vigorous deliberation at our December ACI meeting on recommended revisions, Ms. Gaylord is updating the report for presentation at the March meeting. So we're excited to see what she's created, and we look forward to hearing everyone's feedback. The Special Services Department announced its meeting with MCPAC members who provided input via a Google form for the development of the department's auditor's RFP. So the RFP, request for proposal, will be posted this spring, and the anticipated review is expected to last up to 2 years. ESSER funding has also supported the hiring of a clinician at Orchard Hill. This is big for us. This staffer, I'm told, is on board from January to June at least to deliver tiered mental health support from anywhere between 25 to 30 students. And in its effort to bolster post-secondary transitioning, there will be a series of presentations by either district staff or outside providers such as the Division of Developmental Disabilities. A presentation was held on 1/18 and another one is scheduled for 3/29. Future presentations will include those on transitioning to college and receiving services through the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. And finally, and yet again, many of you know I am a sports fanatic. So I've attended just about every single MHS boys basketball game, a girls basketball game. I plan to make it to a boys and girls swimming meet, a wrestling match, and the spring sports to at least one. Please check out the athletic department's webpage if you too are interested in cheering on our talented student athletes. Athletics is not only a way to demonstrate physical prowess, it's also a pathway for development of lifelong skills in the areas of leadership, time management, mentorship, And research has shown that athletes yield higher academic performance, as well as an enhanced sense of responsibility and accountability. Go Cougars. Ms. Harris?
Thank you, Zelda.
You're welcome.
So the Equity Committee met on January 19th at 7 p.m. virtually. And as Zelda said, our ARRC is now the Equity Committee. We made some changes in January, renamed the committee. However, Phyllis will be taking over as our chair for Equity, but we're still keeping ARRC, and Maria Spina will become our chair of the ARRC committee. So that will become a subcommittee underneath our Equity Committee. And we also, if you please keep an eye out for our January e-news blast. We had our students who created content on the high school event that is occurring called Brave Space. So 2 of our committee members are creating an event, and it's going to be in person for high school students after school. And the date did move. It was originally supposed to be end of January, but the new date will be February 2nd. And flyers will be going out to students in the building. Also, in February, we're hoping to host a workshop that is in the works, but it would be called How to Raise Children with Racial Empathy. So it will be for parents and students. So please keep an eye out for that if we can lock down a date for that. Also, we are, as a committee, really trying to continue to educate ourselves as well, not just the community. And we had our first article for our committee to discuss called 10 Lessons for Talking About Race, Racism, and Racial Injustices. And this was a wonderful article Max Rodriguez provided to our committee, and it really utilized user-friendly language and provided examples for daily use. What else? Next, we are going to be looking at our committees within the schools, and we are assigning our equity members to pretty much determine a needs assessment, so we can make sure there's no overlap and pretty much see how the equity committee can be a resource and a help for these committees. And next, there's more. Our next meeting will be February 16th, and Stacey Anderson is going to present to us past events and opportunities to have a group discussion. So we're looking forward to hearing that and also discussing ideas for future vision. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. So now we will hear from, Ms. Shower.
Actually, I think Sharice is present.
He is present?
Sharice.
Oh, see him. Mr. Jawari, you there? Yay, welcome, wonderful. All right, you're next. OFF, let's go.
Yeah, so OFF committee met on January 14th. Due to a last minute conflict, I couldn't attend in person, but was attended by the committee members along with our friends at MTSD. And most of the conversation was around healthcare. So that's a topic we followed up on with our Brown and Brown, the broker partners as well. So quick update is that there is a recommendation for the board to approve the change in our stop loss reinsurance provider. And the detail we learned looking at the claims data for last year, specifically during COVID, though our utilization was low, but as we are coming out of the COVID, the utilization has went up, and there are certain pockets where we have high utilization, and that has resulted in more than expected claims payout. So we have a good offer from our insurer, Horizon, specifically on medical and pharmacy claims. But as a district, we decided to go with the stop loss being a self-insured plan. There is a recommendation to change it from Horizon provided by Brown and Brown, that yes, it worked out well for us, even during the pandemic times. So with that, I'll request the rest of the committee members to chime in and share updates if they would like.
We also discussed fiscal '23 budget, preliminary discussion involving mostly around healthcare, but we're starting the process.
Thank you, Alicia.
Thanks, Alicia. Okay, Mr. Speck, Policy and Communications Committee report.
Yes. So there's 7 policies and regulation changes that are up for a second reading and that we'll be adopting this evening as part of Agenda Item 1.5. At our organization meeting, the board decided that we were going to have 2 vice presidents, and so that is actually contrary to our policy. So under Agenda Item 1.4, we have a change to the board officers' policies to incorporate the optional inclusion of having a second vice president as we do now. So we'll be covered by that. So that's up for first reading this evening. If anyone has comments on that, they can pass them on to me, and we will discuss it at our next policy meeting, which is in a couple of weeks. There were some rippling effects also. There's some related policies that also deal with officers and board governance in general that we're going to be reviewing at our next meeting, which is February 10th, actually. So the policies about board committees, board meetings, duties of officers, and a possible new policy on agenda planning that we were looking ahead at what things normally happen during the school year so that the board members are aware of what's happening and we can kind of monitor progress on those. And as Mr. Fogarty said tonight, I'm sure we'll be reviewing policy 5512, which is for HIV. And so in any case, we're going to be starting our discussions of those at our policy meeting, and so we'll bring them forward for first reading in the next board meeting. Any questions about that?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speck. All right. Madam First Vice President, the Human Resource Committee report.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, everybody. So the Human Resources Committee convened on January 11. That was our first meeting for the year. And after going through, the usual confidential items, we did discuss briefly the ongoing MHS Vice Principal search led by Principal Pino Beatty. And the committee just asked questions around process, how the interview is being conducted, the field of applicants, and we're really looking forward to finding out the pick for our new vice principal, because that person will fill very big shoes left by Ms. Pino Beatty, who's now our high school principal. And we also briefly discussed that job fair season has begun. And last year, my partnership with Assistant Superintendent Kelly Mathis was very successful. So Mr. Fogarty, she's inviting me to join her again to her job fair, this season. So I will be joining Ms. Mathis and helping her out. So that's it.
Great. Can't think of a better spokesperson.
Yes, it will be
I second that.
here. Thank you for that. All right, great. Thank you so much. And finally is our president's report. So what does it mean to be a champion for students? During the summer of 2020, Cookie Patrick, Ali Baliwala, and I were brought together, not having known one another previously, and agreed to run for the 4 open Montgomery Board of Education seats. 3 were the 3-year term and 1 was for the 1-year term. We decided to name our slate Champions for Students. Patrick and our new board member, Maria Spina, ran with the same moniker during the fall of 2021. In 2020, however, I was reminded of the phrase by the superintendent of the district where I currently work. And while many of my colleagues believe she coined the phrase, they later learned she did not. She adopted the phrase from one of her mentors, Dr. Rita Pearson. Dr. Pearson was a devoted educator in the Houston, Texas area and was often a keynote speaker at numerous education conferences. Bless you. It was the summer of 2010 where I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Pearson at a U.S. Department of Education conference held in Washington, D.C. She spoke about classroom environment, pedagogy, and the role of a teacher at a plenary session I attended. Now I know why those longs were real long to meet her and get a picture with her. I did not do that. I should have. Nonetheless, so several times since elected, I've been admonished not to reference the Champions Campaign slate name because it was perceived as isolated and inappropriate when conducting board business. Confused, and after a robust Q&A period, I explained to the individual that identifying as a champion for students isn't a political reference at all. It anchors the philosophy that guides the meaningful work we do as educators. No matter what role one is fulfilling, teacher, bus driver, paraprofessional, principal, board member, or superintendent, attorney, the individual suggested it may be a good idea to share this insight with the community. Now, I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty sure Dr. Pearson was aware of the derivation of the word champion. Trial by combat was a method of Germanic law to settle accusations in the absence of witnesses or confessions in which two parties in dispute fought in a single combat. The winner of the fight was proclaimed to be the person backed by God and viewed as in the right. Now, within the rules of trial by combat, if you could not fight for whatever reason, you could name someone else to fight on your behalf. And it was from this world of fighting on another's behalf, of engaging the battle for the sake of another, via trial by combat, where we get the word champion. So a champion was, in short, someone who entered the battlefield with the purpose of fighting for the gain of another. Champions have evolved over the years to be someone who steps up to ensure that another person's well-being is cared for, is nurtured and protected, valued. As educators, no matter the student family, and regardless of race, gender, sexual identity, socioeconomic level, we are all most certainly champions for all of our students. So then as parents, caregivers, and board members, we are all champions for students too. So, David, we will now watch a TED Talk that Dr. Pearson conducted in May of 2013, shortly before her unexpected passing. And while Dr. Pearson's experience was predominantly in the inner city, her message on the power of building relationships resonates with all of us. And I hope you enjoy this TED Talk as much as I always do.
I have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good, some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding. relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologizing. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. They said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class. Because I am the best teacher and you are the best students, they put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise, you just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so, I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on this paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of me. +2 said, I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand To have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection, it's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
Any commentary before we move on?
Tom.
Sure, Mr.
I just wanted to thank you for that. It's good to have professional development from time to time, and I think that was a great summary of things. I also appreciate your introduction, because I think all of us here at this board are champions for students, and that's what our mission is. So thank you for bringing that up.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speck. You know, put it at the end of your email. Right? So when we send our emails, everybody knows that you are a champion for students. Shout it out loud. Oh, repeat that, Phyllis. I missed you.
Very inspiring.
Thank you, that was very inspiring.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Just real quick, I just want to echo what Rich said, and that piece was a reminder why we're here.
Yes.
That was excellent.
Excellent. Okay, very well. So at this time, we're going to move to the approval of minutes. So it's recommended that the board approve the minutes, and before I ask for a motion, I would like to read each. First are the December 14th, 2021 executive session meeting minutes. Second, same date but our business meeting minutes. Third, January 4th, 2022 executive session meeting minutes. Fourth, same date, our reorganization meeting minutes. So I'd like a motion at this time to approve those 4 minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Any nays or abstentions? Fabulous.
Wait, hold on. Phyllis, you abstained
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
from December and January?
From all.
Okay, now we will recognize correspondence to the board, and that is simply a recognition, and there were 8. All right, so now we're at the point, we are nearing the end of this meeting for the second public comment. Members of the public are allotted the second opportunity to address, well, technically the first, to address the board regarding action agenda items only for up to a maximum of 3 minutes during this period to the meeting. All comments or questions must be directed to the board president. The board president may need to refer an issue to the superintendent or designee if the particular issue has not been handled through the appropriate chain of command within the school district before coming to the board for a response. All responses will be provided during this session if appropriate and applicable. Ms. Shower?
Chris Wilson, Carriage Trail. Very quick comment. My first grade teacher was Mrs. Pregler. She believed that I was going to go to college someday. I was the first one in my family to do so. Grandson of Mexican and Eastern European Jewish immigrants, both fleeing their respective countries for a better life. And you know, she was at my high school graduation, my college graduation. She was at my wedding. She was at my brother's wedding. She's 83 years old right Mrs. Pregler also believed in explicit, systematic instruction of literacy, and if that's something that the board takes on and our district takes on, the potential savings in special education, which is in the action agenda as a budget item, I think I see $12 million. So if we can make a 1% difference in the students identified with learning disabilities receiving special education instruction and move those kids into general education with improved instruction and curriculum, you can save $120,000 for every 1%. And so, for that reason, I hope that you continue to have that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, absolutely. Okay. Looks like that completes our second public comment. Thank you, Ms. Shower. So, at this time, prior to asking for a motion to approve our action agenda items this evening, I would just like to move items 1.0 to 4.3 for the board's consideration for approval tonight. 4.3 is added to the agenda and represents an amendment to our CWA collective bargaining contract that consists of our bus drivers, bus aides, and dispatchers. I believe there are copies on the table. Here to the left. Yes, Phyllis?
Hold on, what is that? Sorry, Phyllis?
So
Move the
Oh,
item.
you-
I just moved the items, Phyllis.
Yeah, I think President Spence Wallace was just finishing up her comments. We haven't moved it yet.
Right. I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, the copies are on the table. All
So
right.
now we need a motion to,
Now we need a motion for the move, please.
Phyllis?
again, so moved.
Second, please.
Okay.
Okay, great.
and this is requires roll call.
Yes.
Okay, so roll call, Ms. Bursch?
Yes for all except for 1.4. I'm abstaining because I want to change and edit.
Mr. Carlson? Ms. Franco Herman?
Yes.
Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Speck?
Yep.
Ms. Spina?
Yes.
Mr. Chouari?
Yes.
Mr. Todd?
Yes.
Ms. Spence Wallace?
Yes.
Everything approved.
So everything. So that movement and that motion carries. So at this time, it has once again been a pleasure to serve on your behalf tonight. I would like to thank each and every board member for your commitment and your valuable insight and your dedication to the Montgomery community. Happy National School Boards Recognition Month to each of us. Yes. So until we all see each other again, we wish you all well. Happy Valentine's Day. Happy President's Day. Happy birthday. All right. So at this time, if there's no other matters of order, I'd like a motion to adjourn our January 25th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Yes. All in favor? Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Be quiet, Phyllis. And this meeting is adjourned.
All righty.